What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is a story where Issei met Kuroka early and saved her. What if human Issei found a certain black Nekoshou, broken and bleeding? But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations. Now, let's get into the story. Issei was sitting in his bedroom reading when he heard a crash. He flung down the book he'd been reading and dashed into the room with the source of the noise, his kitchen. As he suspected, the window had been completely shattered. What he hadn't suspected is what broke it. The girl with black cat ears and two black tails lay on the floor amidst the broken glass, unconscious and bleeding. Issei gasped as a torrent of thoughts flooded his mind. Who was she? Why did she have real cat parts? Was she human? Why had she broken into his house and collapsed? Was she running from someone? Should he call the police? An ambulance? Issei grimaced, not knowing what to do. She probably wouldn't want an ambulance, going off intuition. The unconscious girl cried out in pain, clutching at her right leg. At that point, Issei's protective instincts overrode any apprehensions he was having, and he picked her up bridal style. "This is insane," he mumbled. Issei carefully carried her into an unused guest room, laying her on the bed. She was wrapped in what looked to have previously been an extravagant black kimono, before whatever had happened to her happened. Now, it was tattered and ragged, damp from the light rain and slick with her own blood. Any obi that might have accented it was long gone. Issei wasted no time in pulling it off her, caring more for the girl's safety than her modesty. She wore nothing under it, but Issei did her the courtesy of not looking anywhere he didn't have to. Once he could see clearly, he was astounded. Her body was covered from head to toe in slash wounds of all kinds. None of them looked particularly deep except one, though, on her right thigh. It went down from the top of the thigh to a few centimeters above her knee and was the source of most of the blood. Before he did anything, he had to first make sure it wouldn't be a waste of time. He bent down and put his right ear to her mouth, listening for breathing and watching for the slow rise and fall of her impressive chest, which he was just now noticing and definitely wasn't looking at the whole time. Definitely. Hearing a tiny, almost imperceptible breath, Issei had confirmed that she was still alive, and therefore doing nothing to help the odd catgirl would be the same as killing her. Setting his jaw, he ran to his bathroom and collected an advanced first aid kit, retrieving from it a roll of bandages, some sterile needles, suture wire, disinfectant, scissors, and tweezers. Everything he'd need for a makeshift surgery. Rain began to pour outside as he set to work. It had been quite a while since he'd stitched a wound, and he'd never done it on a human, but he remembered the basics. Thread the needle, insert, pull through, continue until finished. After a grueling several minutes, he pulled the needle up for the last time and tied a surgeon's knot, then cut the thread off. The worst of the bleeding had stopped, but she was still coated in scrapes and scratches, so Issei began to disinfect and bandage them all. Done. As Issei has wrapped the final bandage around her last wound, one on her wrist, the girl groaned, consciousness stirring within her. Issei looked like a deer in headlights as she slowly began to open her eyes. They were bright gold, the most gorgeous he'd ever seen. Come to think of it, the girl herself was by far the most beautiful woman he knew. Biting his tongue, Issei prepared to have to hold her down to keep her from trying to move, but almost as soon as her eyes opened, they rolled back and closed again. He sighed in relief. Having to fight a hysteric catgirl would have ruined his night and probably would have torn open her stitches, creating an entirely new set of problems. Satisfied that all her wounds had been addressed, Issei went over to a closet behind the bed and retrieved a modest maroon and black nightgown. As he held it in his hands, he stopped and a memory wedged into his mind. His mother, wearing the same nightgown, comforting him as a child after his first pet had died. Issei shook his head, dismissing the thought. His mother hardly needed the gown now, and she wouldn't object to it being used for this purpose anyway. He moved back to the bed, where his patient was sleeping. Slowly and extremely carefully, he clothed her in the nightgown. Once she was at least partially covered, Issei elevated her head with a couple of pillows, wrapped her in a fresh blanket, and retreated to his kitchen. He grabbed a chair and brought it back to the bedroom, ready to sit with the girl all night in case something happened. As Kuroka slowly came back to consciousness, she was struck by an odd sensation. She could barely move. Her limbs refused to listen, and she seemed to be covered by something. She didn't bother trying very hard to move anyway, because her entire body was racked with pain. Her eyes shot open, now fully awake. She swiftly looked around, expecting to be in a prison cellar surrounded by angry devils. Surprisingly enough, that was not the case. She was in an ornate bedroom, lying on a comfortable bed, wrapped in a soft blanket. There was only one other person in the room, a boy with his head down next to her, asleep on a chair. Kuroka was utterly confused. Where was she? Had she escaped the devils? Who was this boy? Had he saved her? She looked a little closer at him. He was sleeping soundly on the side of the bed she was in, apparently exhausted. He was kind of cute. Are you gonna sleep all day or? Ack. Kuroka attempted to say something to him, only to launch into a coughing fit. Issei was instantly woken by the noise, looking up in concern. Once he realized what was happening, he dashed into his kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from his fridge, and carried it back to her. Don't move. Open your mouth. Issei said firmly, as her cough died down. Kuroka, more than anything, wanted to not have to be fed water, but she was in no position to argue. She still couldn't move without sending screaming pain through her whole body, and even just attempting to talk had made her cough. So, she opened her mouth, and Issei slowly dribbled the water onto her tongue. She swallowed greedily, only just now realizing how thirsty she actually was. After a moment, Issei pulled his arm back, thoroughly disappointing her. Her throat was still parched, and her mouth was dry as a desert. More? He said, after giving her a couple of seconds for that settle. Kuroka reluctantly nodded. Issei moved the water bottle back over her mouth, but as soon as it was in reach, she lunged for it with her mouth and caught it by her teeth, tilting it directly up and drinking it all as fast as possible. Issei almost tried to grab it, but she seemed alright, so he let her keep drinking, as much as she could handle. Please be careful. After completely draining the bottle, she spits it out to the side, sighing in satisfaction. Renewed, she spoke once more. Kuroka began to ask, interrupted by a sudden flash of intense pain. Cringing, she eyed the boy warily. She didn't try to talk again. Please don't try to speak. I'm Issei Haidu. You crashed through my window last night, unconscious and bleeding like crazy, so I brought you in here and patched you up. Don't strain yourself, I'll take care of everything. Just rest, for now. As he spoke, Kuroka used Senjutsu to take a look at his aura, trying to see if she was in any danger from him. With as feeble as she was, she could barely see anything, but she could make out the smallest details. His aura was almost pure white, with just the faintest flecks of gold, and that meant she was safe. He more than likely wouldn't try to harm her. You were cut up really badly. I bandaged all your smaller wounds, but there's one on your right leg I had to stitch. Under no circumstances should you move that leg, okay? The stitching is really mediocre and you'll easily pull it out if you try to move. I'm not a doctor or anything, but it's the best I could do. Was I right in guessing you didn't want an ambulance? Kuroka nodded. Going to a human hospital like this was the last thing she needed. Alright. I'm gonna ask you some yes or no questions. Don't bother moving your head, I don't want you to strain. Just tap your index finger once for yes, or don't tap at all for no. Issei gently rested his right hand under her left hand, then waited for a moment to see if she was in any discomfort before continuing. Kuroka was, for the most part, astounded at how gentle and caring the boy was being, despite not knowing her in any way. She hadn't felt a kind touch in a very, very long time, and she'd almost forgotten what it was like. The warmth of his hand was comforting in a way she wasn't used to, and it made her blush just a bit. Thankfully, Issei didn't notice. Are you ready? One faint tap on his palm, just barely enough for him to feel it. That was all he needed. Are you human? No taps. Issei nodded, that was what he expected. Was someone chasing you? One tap. Issei grimaced, wondering just who had hurt her so badly. Were they human? No tap. Issei's worries grew exponentially, but he didn't let it show. Do you remember what happened? You don't have to tell me, I just want to make sure you don't have amnesia. One tap. Were the people chasing you? Police. Or something like that. One hesitant tap. Are you a criminal? Kuroka went limp, slumping deeper into the bed. Of course, he'd work his way back to that question. She was wrong to expect kindness from. I don't really care either way, I'm just trying to get a better picture of what happened. I wouldn't have driven those guys off if I wasn't going to protect you from them, criminal or not. Kuroka looked dead at him, shock apparent in her eyes. You got rid of. Don't talk. Yes, I got rid of them. About an hour after I found you, they knocked on my door, asking if I'd seen you. I said no, they didn't believe me, and things got a little, heated. Issei rose from his place by the bed, wondering who could be ringing his doorbell at a time like this. A quick look at his phone told him it was well past 1 o'clock in the morning, so the likelihood was that it was whoever had been after the catgirl was still looking for her. Issei opened his front door to 3 men in strange, mostly black clothes standing on his porch. Are you gentlemen aware of what time it is? He asked, putting on an act like he'd been rudely woken up. Yes sir, we are, and we're terribly sorry to bother you, but this is urgent. We're looking for a girl with black hair, about this tall, wearing a messed up kimono. She killed somebody, and we're trying to find her. Killed somebody? Really? In this neighborhood? I haven't heard anything. Issei said, feigning surprise. No sir, far from here, but we've been after her for a while now, and the trail went cold near your house, so we were wondering if you'd seen her. Okay, that's terrifying. No, I haven't seen her. The man in front of the other two, who'd been talking, happened to glance at Issei's hands. They were bloody. Do you mind if we take a look inside, sir? She could be hiding in your home, and I don't think I need to explain why that would be bad. No, I'm afraid you can't. If I'm being honest, gentlemen, it's more than a little suspect that you show up at this hour talking about a murder and asking to be let inside my house. You definitely aren't cops, and I don't think I've heard of any law enforcement agency who lets their employees run around during the dead of night in pitch black robes. You'll have to excuse me, but I think we've talked enough. Good night. Issei went to close the door, his heart hammering in his throat. He told them off without even thinking about what would happen if they retaliated, and the thought that they were inhuman like the girl frightened him to no end. As soon as the door was almost closed, the man in front caught it. Whose blood is that on your hand, sir? He asked, eyes narrowed. Please leave, or I'll call the police. Issei said, trying to close the door again. It wouldn't budge. We're going to look around inside. Do not resist. The man said, pulling the door open. The other two men started forward, and Issei sighed in disappointment. Fine. Guys, I really didn't want to do this, but you're kinda forcing my hand. Are we gonna have to get nasty? Issei asked, smirking. The men's eyes went wide as a wicked red gauntlet formed on Issei's arm. They all backed up a step, more out of instinct than anything. The boosted gear? I haven't seen the girl you're after. Now, get the fuck off my property. Issei said through clenched teeth as he shoved the man in front back into his lackeys, sending them all off his porch and into the rain. Why yes sir, Mr. Red Dragon. We're terribly sorry to bother you. All three of them retreated as Issei closed the door. Once inside, he inspected the gauntlet with a renewed appreciation. It made them flee in outright terror. The boosted gear, huh? But, don't sweat it. We won't be seeing them again for a while. Issei said, reflecting on what had happened several hours earlier. The girl wasn't aware that he had any special gauntlet, and he knew next to nothing about the supernatural world, other than that he was part of it, so it would be best not to lay down all his cards just yet. So, he refrained from giving her all the details. Truth be told, he barely knew a single thing about the gauntlet he could summon, other than the fact that it was called the boosted gear and apparently made him the Red Dragon, and he just learned that. He didn't know what it could do, where it came from, what the Red Dragon was, or anything else, but he knew that it terrified whoever came knocking last night, and that was enough. So, I'm gonna ask again, but I want you to remember that I'm on your side until you give me a reason not to be. Are you a criminal? Kuroka sighed in relief, all the tension leaving her body. She tapped her finger, finally answering Issei's question. Did you kill someone? A moment of hesitation, and a look of worry across her face. One tap. Issei nodded, idly rubbing a circle into the palm of her hand. I think I can put together what happened. Tap if any part of this is wrong, okay? Kuroka tapped once, signaling agreement. Issei continued. You killed someone out of self-defense or something like it, and you've been on the run since. Those guys were trying to get to you because of who it was you killed. No taps. Just one more personal question. Are you evil? Kuroka closed her eyes, thinking. She hadn't wanted to kill anybody. She never had, and just the thought of it made her sick. But the man wasn't giving her a choice, and Kuroka was jolted out of her memories as she felt hot tears pouring down her face. She hadn't even realized she was crying. She hadn't cried in years. Issei smiled and nodded in understanding, then wiped her tears away with his thumb. Please don't cry. I don't know what happened, but I know you're not a bad person, and I know it wasn't your fault. You're safe now, so don't cry, okay? Kuroka let him wipe her tears. Damn, I must look pathetic. Hey, are you hungry? You probably haven't eaten in a while. I made some soup, in case you. A flurry of taps. Issei chuckled, then went to warm up the soup he'd made. In just a minute he was back, a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup and a spoon in one hand, and 2 more bottles of water in the other. Kuroka suddenly felt extremely apprehensive. Surely he wasn't going to literally spoon-feed her. But, when she tried to lift her arms, she found herself entirely unable to do so. To great effort, she turned her head away, refusing to be so weak. Look, I know it's embarrassing, but just try to bear with it, alright? You've gotta eat something, or you'll never heal up. I'll go as fast or as slow as you want. Issei sat back down with the soup and put the water bottles on a nightstand by her head. Now, say ah. See, that wasn't so terrible. 3 empty water bottles littered the ground, and Issei put the empty bowl upon the nightstand. Kuroka had just finished the last bite of the soup. That was, without a doubt, the most embarrassing experience of her life, but she was too hurt to argue and too hungry to refuse. I'll go get you some painkillers, and hopefully those will help you feel a bit better. Issei went and got some Advil, then helped the girl take them. Even with water, she struggled to swallow the pills, but was relieved when it was over. Kuroka breathed out heavily, finally getting some relief. Her eyes grew heavy, and she noticed how tired she was. Feel free to go to sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. She didn't need any more encouragement than that. When Kuroka opened her eyes again, she was alone, and it was dark. Issei. She cried out, momentary panic setting in. She still couldn't move, and to be alone was frightening, after essentially confessing to murder in a stranger's home. What's wrong? Issei asked, flying into the room and turning on the lights as fast as he could. His eyes were wide with concern. Kuroka came to the realization of how exactly she just yelled, and she blushed. Here she was, one of the strongest Nekoshou of all time, and she needed some human kid to change her diapers. I was worried, Kuroka said, able to at least talk now. I'm sorry I wasn't here, I had to go check on something for a second. Are you feeling better? Kuroka feebly shifted around in the bed. She healed faster than most, and though she could not yet move freely, she could squirm. I guess so. Can we talk for a bit, then? I suppose so, Naya. Naya? Issei asked with a questioning look on his face, wondering about her odd choice of words. In response, Kuroka twitched her ears. Her cat ears. Oh, right. So you're, like, alleged catgirl. Sure. Catgirl is nigh as good a term as any, I suppose. So, what's your name, catgirl? Kuroka briefly hesitated, still not sure if she could trust Issei. But, she didn't really have a choice. Kuroka, Naya. Nice to meet you, Issei Haidu. Likewise, shame it couldn't be under better circumstances. How's your leg feel? Like shit. Not surprising. I haven't sutured anything for a while, and I've never been the best at it. If you weren't a special case, I wouldn't have hesitated to call an ambulance. The special case, Naya. Why not just call me what I am? What are you? A Nekoshou, Naya. One of the strongest. Normally. Kuroka spoke with bluster until she remembered exactly where she was. That is to say, in someone else's bed, unable to move, and being weighted on hand and foot. Anyway, where'd you learn how to give someone stitches, Naya? You're a high school student, by the looks of it. Just graduated, actually. My dad, before he left, was a doctor, and my mom was a veterinarian. I grew up taking care of animals, so I've done some stitches before. You're not calling me an animal, are you, Naya? I dunno, you seemed pretty animal-like devouring that soup. TCH. Don't think just because you spoon-fed me that I'm some kind of a wimp, Naya. I know things you wouldn't believe, human. I was hoping so. I recently acquired a thing, and I was wondering if you knew what it was. Finally going through puberty, Naya? Kuroka asked, laughing at his phrasing. Issei blushed just a tad. No, it's probably better if I just show you. Kuroka stopped laughing, and it was her turn to blush. Whoa, hey, we've only known each other for a day. It's not something like that. Just look. Issei held up his left arm and summoned his gauntlet. Kuroka stared with obvious surprise. You don't know what that is? Not a clue. It just appeared a while ago. Issei, you're the Red Dragon Emperor. Kuroka breathed out, shocked. No wonder he'd been able to chase away her assailants, he was the Red One, for Surzich's sake. Yeah, don't know what that means either. How much do you know about the supernatural, Naya? None. I learned less than 24 hours ago that people other than humans exist. Where to even start, Naya? I guess. I'm a yakai, an ekamata, specifically a Nekoshou like I said. The people chasing me were what's called devils. I'm one of those too. You say it like it's a bad thing. It is. Kuroka yelled suddenly. Sorry, Naya. It's just. Most people don't become devils by choice. I definitely didn't, Naya. Do you want to talk about it? Not particularly. But, since you're starved for information and you've been so nice, I'll enlighten you. You don't have to if you don't want to. Right. After my parents died, I was resurrected as a servant by a passing high-class devil. Fast forward, like 15 years, and the same guy, who was always an unhinged prick, tries to experiment on my sister and I, so I kill him. This was, I don't know, 2 years ago. I've been on the run since, but I got a run of bad luck recently. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I kinda know how that feels. Kuroka stared at Issei, wondering how in the world he knew how that felt. I mean, not literally, obviously, but my dad left when I was just a kid, and my mom. She died. A couple of weeks ago. So, Issei started to tear up. After Kuroka had talked about her past so flawlessly, he tried to do the same, but he'd been very close to his mother, and he most certainly was not over her death. Kuroka, on the other hand, felt horribly guilty. Struggling just a bit, she managed to take Issei's hand in hers, trying to comfort him. We're both alone, huh? Kuroka asked, half joking. Truly, that wasn't something she'd ever expect to say, but she trusted Issei, despite knowing him for so short a time. Yeah. Guess so. Issei shuddered, trying to keep calm. He'd almost forgotten, which is exactly what people kept telling him to do, but he didn't want to. How could he? He loved his mom, he didn't want to forget her, he wanted her back. Hey, stop. You're a guy, you're not supposed to cry, Naya. Kuroka said, worrying about Issei. She wished she never would have brought her parents up. She'd had 15 years to get over it and he only had a couple of weeks. She knew exactly how he felt. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. Issei wiped his face, trying not to embarrass himself any further. Hey Issei. Quick question. If I look under this blanket, what will I see, Naya? Issei blanched. Your clothes were wet and bloody, and did you strip me, Issei? How daring, Naya. To think I've been naked this whole time. You're not naked, you're in a nightgown. I didn't want to put anything tougher on you, because it might have hurt when you woke up. Well, that means you've at least seen me naked, Naya. Now we have to get married. Don't joke about stuff like that. Who's joking, Naya? Can we go back to the gauntlet, please? I suppose, Naya. Long story short, there's a dragon, one of the most powerful to ever live, in your arm, Naya. His name is Drake, and if you haven't heard from him, it's because you're not powerful enough, Naya. Powerful enough? You sound like a comic book. I'm serious, Naya. Kuroka sighed heavily. I've got a lot to teach you before I leave, huh? I guess so. Wait, leave? Well, yeah. I've got to get going at some point once I can move, Naya. But why? What do you mean, Naya? Why do you have to go? Those devils aren't coming back here, and if they do, I can. You can't do anything, kid. I don't know how you managed to drive them off, but if you haven't even spoken to the dragon in your arm yet, then it's lucky those devils didn't kill you. You're not just keeping a patient, you're harboring Kuroka, an SS-class criminal. I can't stay here or anywhere for long. I have to keep moving. Did you think I'd stay here forever? But where? Where are you going? There's someone I have to find. My little sister. Last I heard, she's in this town. Oh. What's her name? Shirin. No. Kaneko. Kaneko Taoju. Wait, seriously? Yes, Naya. Why would I lie about my sister's name? Wait. You know something? Kuroka's eyes narrowed. Yeah, I know something. I know where she is right now, as a matter of fact. She was my junior at Kuo Academy. What? Really? Yeah. I can take you there once you can safely walk. Listen, if you're lying about this. I'm not. I promise. Issei's grip tightened on her hand as he looked her dead in the eyes. Ugh, fine. I guess I'm in your care for the time being. And, after I find my sister. We'll see. Issei smiled, bright. Truth be told, she was the only person he'd really talked to since his mother's death, and the thought of just being left alone again absolutely terrified him. Hey Issei. Yes. You're a dragon, and you're kinda cute. Marriage might not be a total joke, Naya. It hasn't even been 24 hours since we met. Things work fast in the supernatural world, especially when it comes to Nekomata, Naya. And, I've kind of taken a liking to you, so don't be so quick to dismiss me, Naya. Kuroka. Yes, Naya. Can I touch your ears? Kuroka stared at Issei for a solid 30 seconds, withering the boy away with her bored gaze. Finally, she relented. I suppose, Naya. 5 seconds. Issei jumped at the chance. Ever since his first time seeing her fluffy ears, he'd wanted to feel them. Almost excruciatingly slowly, he reached out towards her head. Get on with it, Naya. Issei rubbed her right ear, marveling at how soft it was. It defied his every expectation. It was, without a doubt, the softest and most wonderful thing he'd ever touched in his life. Now, Issei had owned several cats during his lifetime. He knew exactly how to make them purr and what places they liked and didn't like. Involuntarily and unconsciously, he fell back into the familiar pattern of scratching a cat's ears in the best way possible. 5 seconds passed. He didn't realize Kuroka had started to blush. 10 seconds passed. Issei kept going, unaware of the time. Kuroka's eyes were half-lidded and her cheeks sported a deep red hue. 20 seconds. Issei pinched the tip of her right ear, rubbing his index finger up and down the length of it. Naya. Kuroka could no longer stand the stimulation, and she cried out. Issei practically jumped backward, coming back to reality in a flash. I'm sorry. Did I hurt you? Issei asked, looking worried and guilty. Kuroka, breathing heavily with a sultry look, could not have been less hurt. Not at all, Dragon Boy. she said, eyeing him like a piece of meat. If you keep doing that, I just might have to stick around for a while, Naya. Issei felt more than a little awkward. He wasn't such a prude that he didn't know what was happening, but he failed to see how it could have happened from her ears. You look confused, Naya. Did you forget Aniko's erogenous zone is her ears, Naya? You're not half bad at it, either. Wanna do my tails, next, Naya? Pass. Issei exclaimed, having just connected the dots and figured out exactly what he'd been doing the whole time. Kuroka laughed, and he couldn't help but smile along with her. This was by far the most fun he'd had in. Well, since his mom. Suddenly, Kuroka blanched. She'd forgotten something crucial. Issei, I don't mean to alarm you, Naya, but you? What? Yes. Have to use the restroom, Naya. Oh, was that it? Here. Whoa, hey, what the hell are you doing? Issei began unwrapping her from the blanket. He did her wrap tightly so she wouldn't move in her sleep and tear her stitches. Taking you to the restroom. I'm not staying in there with you or anything, so don't freak out. Ugh, this is the worst, Naya. After completely uncovering her, Issei picked the catgirl up in a bridal carry, like he had before. Kuroka had assumed that being spoon-fed would be the most embarrassing part of her life. Nope. It was definitely being carried to a toilet like a baby by someone she just met. Although, she did come up with a decent idea. What better way to teach Issei about his power than by example? Aren't I heavy? Not at all, why? That's nice to hear, but let's pretend I am. Say boost, Naya. Okay. Boost, Naya. Not with the Naya, you dork. Boost. Neither of them had been prepared. Issei staggered and nearly fell when his strength doubled, and Kuroka was more than a little flustered as the hand under her back turned into a dragon arm and pumped out a wave of raw power. What the hell was that, Kuroka? Issei asked, reveling in his new power. He was lifting Kuroka up and down in his arms like it was nothing. That was the boosted gear, Naya. A tool called a sacred gear, one of the strongest, able to double your power every 10 seconds. Seriously? That's totally broken. Which is why it's one of the strongest, Naya. Boost. Okay, take it easy. You're going to hurt yourself really badly if you go past your limit. You're nigh out of shape, so you have a decent power threshold for a human, but you'll be exhausted once it wears off if you go much farther. Oh, alright. Well, anyway. Here we are. Issei approached a closed door, which he opened with a hand under Kuroka's legs, i.e., the non-boosted gear one. Behind it was a spacious bathroom. This is the worst moment of my life, Naya. Kuroka said monotonously. She could not for the life of her figure how she ended up in this situation. You'll get over it. Issei opened another door, inside the bathroom, which led to a smaller room with a singular toilet inside. Well, this is pretty awkward, huh? Ugh, just set me down, Naya. Kuroka rolled her eyes. Issei complied, gently setting her down on her feet in front of the bathroom. She hissed in pain as more and more of her weight was being supported by herself, and once she was entirely on her own legs she could hardly stand. She shook and struggled just to keep her balance, she was in absolutely no shape to move. Issei, without saying a word, poked her with the boosted gear. Transfer. Kuroka nearly moaned as she was flooded with extra power. As minor as it was raw strength, which she'd been sorely lacking for the past day. How did you figure that out? She asked Issei, panting. I don't really know. It just kind of came to me. I thought about helping you, and it just kinda happened. You should be fine now though, right? Yeah. Great. Don't put any strain on your leg, okay? Issei turned to leave, but Kuroka grabbed his sleeve as he moved away. He looked back at her, confused. Thanks. Kuroka said, not looking at him. Don't mention it. Issei left the room, leaving her to handle herself. 5 minutes later, she surprised him by coming back to the bedroom on her own. He'd been waiting at the other side of the room, looking out from the blinds on a window opposite the restroom. Oh, here, lay back down. Don't put pressure on your leg. Issei said, pulling the covers back so she could get back in the bed. Kuroka grimaced, obviously in a very large amount of pain, and Issei instantly noticed. That's the thing, Naya. She said in a shaky voice. I already did. Kuroka turned to the side, revealing her bleeding leg. The stitching had torn in one spot, leaving the wound open. Issei instantly picked her up and set her on the bed, not even leaving the poor girl enough time to react before he grabbed the same tools he'd used to stitch her up before. Whoa, hey, what are you doing? Issei, you're scaring me. That wound was by far your worst. It's deep, and if it stays open you could very well bleed out. You might have made it back in here by yourself, but you are by no means healthy. Sit still. Wait, you're not going to. Reset. Both Kuroka and Issei slumped forward as their shared strength faded into exhaustion. Issei picked himself back up, but Kuroka's head lolled and she looked to be on the verge of passing out. That's a neat drawback. Issei mumbled, gritting his teeth. It would have been very handy to know he had a time limit. Still, Kuroka was losing blood and that meant he had to work fast, exhausted or not. He pulled the suture through his needle and Kuroka saw it. She whimpered. "Kuroka, I'm not going to lie, this will hurt. Hold on to me, I'll try to make it as quick as possible. It's just in one spot, so it won't be as bad as it could be, but it's not going to tickle." Kuroka whimpered again, but put her left hand on Issei's right shoulder, bracing herself. Rapidly blinking, Issei set to work. The moment the needle pierced her skin, Kuroka cried out in pain. Her grip on Issei's shoulder quickly became crushing strength, and he almost found himself wanting to yell with her. But he continued, trying his best to hurry so he could stop hurting her. "Okay, we're done. You did great," Issei said, sighing in relief. Kuroka was sweating profusely and breathing heavily, but she was fine. Issei bent over and wrapped her in a loose hug. We're done. I know that was hard, I'm so sorry I had to do it." Kuroka tensed up. She hadn't been hugged in quite a long time. It was an unfamiliar feeling to her. She did her best to reciprocate, but she could already barely move before the reset and now she felt like her blood had been replaced by lead. "Shut up, Naya. It was my fault. For trying to walk." Issei gave a sarcastic laugh. "Was me carrying you out of the bathroom such an awful thought that you would rather get stitches with no painkiller? Man, I didn't think I was that bad." "Here? Great. Shut up." Issei pulled away. "As much as I hate to say it, I need rest. I've been up for a while. I don't mean to be, well, mean, but I have to get some sleep." Kuroka nodded. She understood, she was exhausted too. "Alright. Good night, then." Issei stood up to leave, but Kuroka caught his arm. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "Kuroka, believe me, I want to help you as much as possible, but I'm gonna pass out at this rate. Sleep is fine. Right here." Kuroka tapped the empty side of the queen-size bed next to her. Issei sighed. "Alright, I guess that works. Only because you're hurt, though." Kuroka nodded mutely, already closing her eyes. Issei stood up and cut the lights off, then slowly slid into the bed opposite her. He tried to keep a fair bit of distance in between them, but Kuroka monopolized his arm by scooting on top of it and essentially forced him to spoon if he wanted any kind of comfort. Or blood circulation, for that matter. "If I wake up and this was all a dream, I'll be pissed," Issei mumbled. Kuroka hummed in agreement. Kuroka sighed in relief, she could move again. She'd just woken up and to her relief and surprise, she felt almost no pain save for her right leg. Kuroka pulled the blanket off herself and in the process accidentally hit Issei in the face. She hissed in recognition, she'd forgotten he was there and had just nailed him in the bridge of the nose with her index knuckle. Issei groaned, sitting up and blinking his eyes. "Whoops." Kuroka said unapologetically, sticking her tongue out at him. "Was that you? I dreamed I got hit with a baseball," Issei said, rubbing his nose. Kuroka, much to Issei's surprise and worry, began to get out of bed. "Hey, your leg is fine. I heal fast," she explained, starting to strip off her various bandages once she stood up. The wounds under each were perfectly closed. After a moment, the only evidence that she'd been hurt at all was the remains of the stitches that had been holding her leg together. Even that was completely healed, and all that was left was to take the stitching out. "How did you manage to not heal for a whole day, and then one nap later everything is fine?" Issei asked, standing up. "I expected you to be out of commission for at least a week. You were ready to take care of me for that long. How thoughtful, Naya. It's probably because of your transfer last night if I had to guess. The extra power jump started my own natural healing, and my natural proficiency in Senjutsu did the rest. I'll be as good as new by tonight, probably." "That's great," Issei said, putting on a happy face. He expected to have at least a few more days of company before he went back to being alone. "Why the long face, Naya? Didn't you swear to protect me? We have some things to take care of." "I don't seem to remember doing anything like that." "Oh yes, you did. Kuroka-sama, I swear on my status as the Red Dragon Emperor that I'll protect you for the rest of your life and I'll give you 10 kittens. Or something like that, Naya." Kuroka waved her arms this way and that, mimicking Issei's voice and acting like some kind of white knight. "I think you might have dreamed that. I suppose it's possible. Does that mean you don't want to give me any kittens, Naya? Let's worry about kittens later. What do we have to take care of?" "Well, I'm still being tailed by devils. Even if they said they'd leave, you can bet your ass that they're coming back. Now that the red one is involved, they're probably coming back with an army, Naya." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Issei glanced out of the window blinds, looking at his porch. "It's just one guy." Red hair, really weird outfit. Huge shoulder. Thin jeans. No, wait, not one guy. There's a maid behind him. Weird. Issei turned back towards Kuroka, who was shaking like a leaf with a horrified look on her face. Is something wrong? He asked, wondering what about his description had made the girl go into a trance. You should answer that. They won't knock twice. Kuroka said, swallowing hard. Who is it? You're kind of scaring me. This will all go way better if I don't tell you. Just be careful. Go answer. I'll stay in here and hide. Kuroka said, coming back to reality. Her run of bad luck had just gotten worse, it seemed. Issei nodded, more than a little bit freaked out by her odd reaction. He made his way to the front door, opening it with some apprehension. Good morning. Issei said, as it occurred to him he didn't actually know what time it was. Good morning, Mr. Haidu. Have a minute to talk. The man with red hair said, smiling. Do I know you? Oh, I doubt it. You might know of me, but we've never met. May we come in? I guess so. Make yourselves comfortable. Issei was never one for mind games. He preferred to say what he meant and leave it at that, but this man. He sensed that the odd stranger with red hair was the exact opposite, and so Issei prepared to use his mediocre silver tongue. This entire conversation would be a game of chess, and a single slip-up would cost everything if Kuroka's reaction was any indicator. Issei and his two guests moved into the living room, just past the front door. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Issei offered, a smile on his face. The two guests thanked him and sat down on his couch. Issei retreated the kitchen, which was connected to the living room, and allowed him and his guests full view of each other. Care for a drink? I'm underage, so I can't offer you a good drink, but I have tea. Issei gave a light-hearted laugh, which the red man returned. The maid was stoic, and it occurred to Issei that her face hadn't moved a single time so far. My wife and I will have whatever you're having if you wouldn't mind. Sure thing. So, to whom do I owe the pleasure? Issei, by acting cordial, was attempting to throw off any suspicion about harboring a criminal. Someone with a fugitive in the house wasn't likely to entertain guests, especially after an attempted attack on himself the night before. Of course, there was also the fact that that's exactly what somebody looking a fugitive would expect. I am Surzich's Lucifer, and this is my wife Grafia. Nice to meet you both. I'm assuming you know who I am since you're visiting. Indeed. Issei Haidu, son of Goro and Shinobu. Graduated from Kuo Academy, lives alone, and hasn't applied for a college yet. Surzich's listed off details of Issei's personal life one after one, while looking him dead in the eyes, yet the man's smile never broke. Nor did Issei's. You've certainly done your research, Mr. Lucifer. May I ask why? Issei returned from the kitchen with 3 cups of black tea, all boiling hot. He placed one each on the coffee table in front of both his guests and kept his in hand as he sat opposite them on a reclining chair. Well, Issei. Do you mind if I call you Issei? As long as I can call you Surzich's. Ah, I wouldn't have it any other way. Well, as I was saying, you've gone and worked into quite a predicament, Issei. You see, 2 nights ago, a few of my associates were searching for an escaped criminal. A murderer, even. They determined her location to be inside your home and yet returned empty-handed, claiming you denied them the right to detain said criminal. Does that sound right? Well, Surzich's, it doesn't, as a matter of fact. 3 men did come to my door at an ungodly hour 2 nights ago, asking about a criminal. I told them the truth, as I'll tell you, I haven't seen a criminal. Now, this was actually a stroke of genius on Issei's part, though he wasn't aware, he didn't know it, but Grafia was a keen lie detector, able to discern even the slightest hint of dishonesty. In his previous line, he'd mentioned he hadn't seen a criminal. In his eyes, he'd seen a girl that was merely a victim of circumstance, a monster only in the eyes of those she wronged. So, technically, he wasn't lying, and he said it with conviction. Grafia never noticed. And, in addition, I might suggest working with different people next time. One of your associates broke my window. Issei gestured behind them, to where the window was still shattered from the day before. Once again, not a lie, Issei rightly guessed that one of the people chasing her had been the one to send her through the window in the first place, and so Grafia saw nothing. And I'm terribly sorry about that, and will do my utmost to replace it. Translation. Give me what I want, and I'll make it worth your while. I don't think that'll be necessary. I've already called someone to fix it later this afternoon. Translation. I don't need anything from you. Ah, very well. Rough translation. Fine, time to play hardball. So, you never saw the criminal? I didn't. The only people I saw were the men you mentioned. Those men mentioned something odd, Issei. Something about you being the possessor of the boosted gear. Issei's breath hitched for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected the conversation to go there. That's right. In that case, let us not speak as Surzich's Lucifer and Issei Haidu. Let us speak plainly, as the Red Dragon Emperor and the King of Devils. Issei nearly shit himself on the spot. He was talking to the King of Devils. No wonder Kuroka was freaking out and hadn't told him who the man was. Alright. Issei said, summoning the boosted gear on his arm. Graphia's body tensed in preparation for movement, but nothing happened. Are you harboring Kuroka? No. Would you tell me if you were? What do you think? Fair enough. What do I have to give you to give her up without a fight? If I had her, I'd say you had to pardon her crimes and give her a free life, no questions asked. If you had her and that was your demand, I'd say I must refuse. That's quite the opposite of my purpose here today. Well, if I was going to all the trouble of harboring this deadly criminal and only requesting that one thing of you in exchange for her and you refused, I'd say I might do something crazy. Maybe. Waging war on the devils. Graphia's face twisted into a snarl and she went to move forward, but Surzich's outstretched hand stopped her. If you were, hypothetically, suggesting such a thing, I'm afraid I'd have to eliminate you here before there could be any casualties. Are you certain you could stop me fast enough if that were to ever happen? After all, isn't your sister just down the road? Issei struck a nerve. All the light-hearted banter was thrown from the room in an instant. An incredibly heavy weight began pushing on Issei from all sides, and Surzich's eyes took on a red hue. Issei realized he might have overstepped, but this was his only option. The moment he'd seen Surzich's up close, he'd connected the dots. His resemblance to Ria's Gremory, Issei's junior at Kuo, was uncanny. The same eyes and hair and face, everything the same. So, he'd made the huge gamble of threatening her to see if he could pull Surzich's into a checkmate by getting a reaction. Truth be told, it was a huge shot in the dark that they were even related. He hadn't expected the man to snap. As he struggled to keep his facade up, Issei came to the conclusion that this was the power of the Devil King, and that in this situation, as the Red Dragon, he was likely supposed to rival it, to give Surzich's an arm wrestle of sorts. But, he simply let it wash over him, smiling all the while. How'd you know? Surzich's asked, anger writhing below his agreeable smile. Just a hunch. You confirmed it for me now, though. Well, let's recap, Devil King. If I did have this criminal, and you were to try and take her from me, I'd retaliate, and because you and I are who we are, the likelihood that your sister would be caught in the crossfire is non-zero. The pressure from Surzich's power increased to an almost unbearable extent, but Issei knew that if he dropped the flawless smile for even a second he'd be killed. He couldn't even hope to match Surzich's level at this point, and so the only option was to act like he could. I suppose you're right, Red One. I suppose you're right. In an instant, Surzich's withdrew his power. The weight of the room returned to normal, and Issei could breathe again. Of course, neither of them could even tell he had been struggling to stay conscious. And where does that leave us, Devil King? Surzich's inhaled slowly, then exhaled. I would guess that leaves us no further than when we started. If I might propose another solution, Issei offered, getting Surzich's attention. Go on. The man had lost his patience, and all semblance of niceties were gone. The Red Dragon could be a terrible enemy or a powerful ally if his request was met. Am I right in assuming his request would be the same as before? Of course. Surzich's sighed and stood up from his spot on the couch. Graphia was quick to follow. You've given me much to think about, Issei Haidu. I'll consider your request and withhold from making any further actions against you until I come up with an answer. Have a good day, Surzich's. I look forward to working with you in the future. Surzich's eyebrows twitched. Good day, Issei. He and Graphia went for the door and showed themselves out. This generation's Red One is truly a terrifying foe. Graphia said, once they were out of earshot. Indeed. To not even flinch from my power, to not even be bothered enough to return his own, and smile the whole time. Not to mention, outwitting me at every turn. I should have sent Seraphol for this. I doubt she would have fared much better. If anything, I think there would have been a fight, and I doubt even she could have beaten someone like that. You and Ajuka are probably the only ones who'd stand a chance. They're probably right. Let's go home for now. Surzich's and Graphia teleported away, right in the middle of Issei's yard. Meanwhile, inside Issei's house. Issei was vomiting into a toilet. Hard. He stopped for a brief moment, taking time to breathe, then puked again. Are you okay? Kuroka appeared at the door, not really sure what to do. Do I look okay? Issei snapped, glaring at her. I just had a pissing match with the fucking King of Devils. I was this close to getting turned into mush by his fucking aura. But you won. You actually outwitted Surzich's Lucifer. Yeah, right. He left because he didn't feel like dealing with it, guaranteed. I mean, even when he was showing off his powers and practically crushing my bones, I couldn't even do shit but sit there and smile like a dumbass. No, Issei, no joke, you actually just outplayed the devil. Like, wow. Kuroka was awestruck. She fully expected to die when she heard Issei describe the people at his door. Yeah, well, whatever. My capacity for bullshit is unparalleled, big whoop. Issei picked himself up off the ground, groaning. He flushed the toilet, hoping he wouldn't have to do that again. He walked over to Kuroka, scratching the back of his head. Ah, I'm sorry. It's just. That was horrifying. That was literally the closest to death I've ever been. It was like staring evil in the eyes. You actually would have died if I wasn't helping. Despite what the past day looks like, the whole damsel in distress act totally isn't my thing, and I'd never live it down if I didn't help at least a little just then. So, when Zexy started pushing out with his power, I started pushing back through you with Senjutsu. That's the only reason he didn't pop you like a balloon, Naya. Issei looked impressed. Well, guess I owe you one, then. Thanks. You know, I don't want to be a dick, but brush your teeth, Naya. Your breath smells like puke. Kuroka said, pinching her nose and waving her hand around. Thanks. Issei replied, half sarcastic. He went to a counter and did exactly that. After he was done, he spoke again, sighing. Well, I did it. For better or for worse, until Surziches finds out I just completely bullshit him and I can't even fight, you're safe here. With me. Kuroka walked over behind Issei, who was tiredly looking into his mirror. She draped herself over him, surprising the boy. You know what, Issei? Listening to you in there, butting heads with Lucifer himself over little old me. I think I'll need those kittens now rather than later, Naya. Kuroka teased, poking him in the cheek with one hand and rubbing his chest with the other. Issei turned around and picked her up in another bridal carry, much to her shock. Whoa, are we actually gonna do it? I didn't think you had it in you, Naya. You're about to be so disappointed. Issei carried Kuroka into the bedroom and put her on top of the bed, but instead of continuing, he fled back into the bathroom. Kuroka, utterly lost, was wondering where he went until he came back out. Holding scissors and tweezers. Kuroka blanched. Gotta get those stitches out, now that you're fine. Whoa, hey, I'm sorry about the puke breath thing, I didn't really. Begging won't help. If we leave them in, they could get infected. That's fine. Look, this won't even hurt. The wound is healed, it'll just pinch and be sore for a bit. Kuroka eyed him warily, almost deciding to jump out of the bed and run away, but she relented. Make it quick. Of course. All I have to do is. Issei cut through the knots, leaving several strands of loose wire hanging from her thigh. Using the tweezers, he pulled them out one by one, making Kuroka cringe. He'd been right, though. It barely hurt. Alright, done. Wait, seriously? That was it? Yeah. The wound was gone, courtesy of your broken healing powers. All that was left was to pull the wire out. Oh. Neat. Hey, I'm starving. Well, we could go get something to eat, but you'll need to wear something else. Issei said, gesturing to the nightgown she was still wearing. The nightgown that happened to be all she was wearing. Oh ho, Naya. You don't like my outfit, Issei? Kuroka asked, playfully pulling one of the gown straps down her right shoulder, causing her large bust to come dangerously close to spilling out. Issei wanted to avert his eyes, but he couldn't look away. At his core, he was a boob man, and like all boob men, he couldn't help himself. Not that she cared. Had got your tongue, Naya. Suddenly, Kuroka stretched, pushing her chest forward and feigning a yawn. This did cause her bust to come spilling out, revealing everything, and Issei nearly fainted. He'd seen her naked chest while she was unconscious, but at the time he'd been focused on saving her then, and now. Juries. Issei couldn't do anything but stare. His mind was fried. Rude to stare, Naya. Kuroka said, sensuously pulling the nightgown back up over herself, taking her sweet time, and making sure she did it just right. Once she was fully covered, Issei snapped back to reality, his face covered with an atomic blush. Kuroka started laughing like a madman, making him blush even worse. Well, now I know you're easy to tease, Issei. That's great information to have. Issei shook his head, trying to regain some kind of focus. She just led him around like a dog on a leash, and she damn well knew it, too. Issei's pride as a man was wounded, and at the same time, he knew that if she did it again, he'd fall under her spell just as easy. You weren't kidding when you said things move fast in the supernatural, huh? Was all he could come up with. Nyap. Kuroka winked at him, her tail swishing playfully through the air. But, as much fun as it is to tease you in this gown, I don't need help with clothes. Watch this, kiddo. She stood up off the bed. Kuroka put her hands up, and what Issei could only describe as a dark purple magic circle in the shape of a hexagon formed around her waist, like a floating hula hoop. It wreathed her in blue light, and after a moment both the circle and light disappeared, revealing her wearing the exact same kimono she'd had on when he found her. Was that real magic? Oh, I guess that was your first time seeing it, huh? Yay, that was real magic. Impressed. Kuroka asked, her tail swishing around excitedly. Definitely. That was pretty cool. Handy, too. Your other kimono was torn to shreds when I found you. It happens more than you'd think. But, you're ignoring something important. How do I look? Kuroka twirled around in a circle, the black and red kimono flowing gracefully around her. It was tied with a golden obi and hung loosely around her shoulders, giving him a bird's eye view of her chest. She'd apparently also summoned some shoes, black jetta that give her at least 2 inches, bringing her up to Issei's height. Fantastic. Aw, thanks. Now let's go get breakfast. I'm starving, Naya. You've got money, right? Issei sighed. Yes, I've got money, and yes, I'll buy. Thanks for offering, Naya. Issei swiftly inhaled, only to heavily exhale a second later. How he'd actually managed to outwit Surzich's, he didn't know because even Kuroka could run circles around him when she tried. The two of them left his house, Issei leading her to a breakfast diner that was just a minute from there. Kuroka, at some point, had hidden her ears and tails from view, appearing as a normal human. Her disguise was so convincing that if it weren't for everything that had happened, Issei might have thought that he'd hallucinated the whole catgirl part. Our first date, Naya. I'm so excited. Kuroka clasped her hands, excitedly stretched her arms out. That's a worse tease than earlier. Issei replied, hanging his head. Who said it was a tease? Kuroka said, looking suggestively at him. Was it not? It doesn't have to be. Then. It's our first date. Issei said, resolutely. He wouldn't deny that the thought had crossed his mind, but he didn't see Kuroka being on board with the idea. So glad you see it my way, Naya. Kuroka said as practically wrapped herself around Issei's left arm. You're going to be the death of me. Probably. You know, in hindsight, I probably should have changed. Or showered. Or literally anything else. Issei said, sniffing under his shirt and grimacing. He'd been in the same clothes for quite some time now, and the smell was present. At least, it was to him. You're fine. I don't smell anything, and my senses are way better than yours, Naya. If you say so. MHMM. Smells like teen spirit. After a moment of contemplation, Issei was visibly taken aback by both the spot on English and the musical reference. Japanese as he was, he spoke fluent English due to his American father, and he'd always had a particular preference for American music, so both struck a chord with him. Was that a Nirvana reference? He replied, in similarly flawless English. Yup. One of my favorites. You like Nirvana? Are you kidding me? Who doesn't? I just didn't see you as the type, I guess. What, just because I'm a demon catgirl I can't listen to music? No, Or maybe, you saw me as more of a cultured high society type who only listens to orchestra. Kuroka said with a smirk, puffing out her chest in mock arrogance. Oh yeah, because the cultured high society types are the ones who crash through people's windows. Not my fault, Naya. Occupational hazard. That's fair. You're sure I don't stink, right? No, you smell like shit and look even worse. Wait, seriously? Naya. You smell fine. As for your looks. Average. So cruel. Kuroka smugly sipped her cup of chocolate milk, which in itself would have been absolutely hilarious to Issei if she hadn't given him a death glare for snickering when she ordered it. He couldn't help it. She was just so feline, even with her cat features magically hidden, and to see a catgirl drinking milk was like the punchline to a corny joke. The two of them were in a family restaurant, built with a stereotypical American breakfast diner in mind. Black and white checkered floors, red glass tables with matching chairs, and enough fluorescent lights to blind someone. Of course, it was a Japanese imitation, so hardly any of the menu items were similar, but the aesthetic was there nonetheless. The two of them speaking English amidst the entirely Japanese crowd at the restaurant drew some glances, but nobody verbally questioned the odd pair. Why would they, anyway? Nobody could tell from a glance that it was really a dragon and a cat having breakfast like humans. Are you ready to order? A waitress finally came by, asking for Issei and Kuroka's orders, which the new couple readily gave, switching back to Japanese. She retreated back to the kitchen, thanking them. So tell me about yourself, dragon boy. What makes Issei tick? Is that the expression? Kuroka asked, using a human saying she'd heard once or twice in passing. Tough question. I like saving lives and love animals. I guess. I dunno if that's what makes me tick, though. Issei said, wondering about the open-ended question. Of course, his willingness and ability to save things, animal or not, had been proven when he lied through his teeth to the morning star himself for her, so Kuroka really wasn't in a position to doubt him on that. I suppose that was a bad question, Naya. Let's start smaller. What's your favorite color? Kuroka asked with a grin, leaning in close. Black, if I had to say. Issei replied, scratching his chin. He realized just a tad bit too late that had been a loaded question, but it was alright, he answered correctly. How fortunate. Black just so happens to be my favorite color too, Kuroka said with a leering smile. Issei was positive that if her tails had been out, they'd be swishing playfully. Right. My turn. I guess this probably should have been asked a while ago, but how old are you? 22. And you, kiddo? There's no way you're older than that. Nah, I'm just 18. 19 in a couple months. Aw, you're so young. That's cute. Doesn't that make you a cougar? Doesn't getting with a cat make you a furry? Ack. Issei choked on his drink, drawing attention from all over the cafe. A waitress moved to see if he needed help, but he ashamedly waved her away as he calmed down. Once he could breathe again, he cleared his throat and tried to ignore the blush that had spread across his face. In all honesty, he hadn't even spared the odd situation a thought. Would it be bestiality to sleep with Kuroka? Naihaha. You've got quite the expression, Issei. What's on your mind? Kuroka, sporting a wicked grin, twitched one of her previously hidden cat ears as she seemingly read his mind. As if on cue, the waitress appeared once more, carrying their orders. Issei excitedly shifted his attention to the food as Kuroka made absolutely no attempt to hide her revealed ears. Those are so cute. After she'd set down their food, the waitress began gushing over Kuroka's ears, not so secretly being a fan of the overall kawaii aesthetic. Where'd you get them? I've never seen any so lifelike. Kuroka took the praise with a smirk. Oh, I can't even remember. Seems like I've had them forever, she said, subtly winking at Issei, who was mentally facepalming. Without much other conversion, the waitress left them alone. Issei tore into his food without much regard for manners, having been half-starved while he'd been taking care of Kuroka. You okay there, dragon boy? You never eaten before or something? Kuroka teased, knowing full well why he was so ravenous. Dragons, demi-dragon or otherwise, were ferocious eaters to begin with, not to mention that fact that he'd been neglecting eating over the past 2 days. Stopping to breathe for a moment, Issei mumbled an eloquent reply. Hungry? Kuroka laughed. Yeah, I can tell. But don't you know it's bad manners to eat like that in front of a lady? Not one to be challenged, and possessing quite the impressive appetite of her own, Kuroka also began to chow down. Whoa, what? There was a lady here? No, you're totally right. No ladies, just a guy who's dating a literal cat. You're gonna give someone the wrong idea. He's done what? And you simply let him? Surziches stood amidst the center of 100 shouting devils, an expression as cold as ice on his face. He'd expected this, he'd known it would happen the moment he'd chosen not to come to blows with the Red Dragon Emperor. He was briefing the devil populace on the state of the SS-class criminal Kuroka's capture, or rather, the lack thereof. I had no choice. Choosing to fight the Red One could have been catastrophic. Seraphol Leviathan, tired of her friend Surziches being belittled by geezers half as strong as him, stood up with a sigh. You're all missing the bigger picture. The Red Dragon Emperor, potentially one of the strongest ever, is offering to be our ally. The only thing we have to offer him is a pardon, and he'll join our side. Not only that, but everyone here knows the case with Kuroka was bullshit anyway. Seraphol thought, recalling how she'd been prosecuted as a murderer for trying to save herself and her little sister from their monster of a father. If it had been up to her, the House of Nibiros would have been struck from the history books as a blight upon devilkind. You can't possibly. Even so. That may be, but we cannot simply. Enough. Surziches boomed, angered by the enormous amount of red tape he had to go through for even the most obvious decisions. He longed for the days when a devil king could simply eradicate those opposed to him, not that he would. Probably. I am your king and Lucifer, and you will bow to my decree. Seraphol and I will handle the specifics, but this girl is to be pardoned. Would anyone like to object? Surzich's eyes burned with barely contained corrosive energy, and the very air around him screamed under the weight of his power. Silence swept across the room in an instant. None would oppose him. None could oppose him. I propose a solution. One of the newest members of the Devil's Higher Council offered, cutting through the heavy quiet. Surziches, both mildly impressed that he'd spoken up in the first place and eager to hear what he had to say, nodded in recognition. The boy is an unaffiliated red dragon, yes. And Kuroka, being what she is essentially a free devil, a bishop in specific. That's correct. Surziches answered, happy to finally see some conjecture, rather than simply a chorus of can or cannots. And as you know, the dragon-taming House of Bune recently lost its last living member, with the exception of one technically related servant of Seraerd Baal. Surziches nodded, acknowledging the fact. I propose we instate Mr. Issei Haidu as the sole heir of the House of Bune and grant him all titles befitting such stature, along with his own peerage, with a fully pardoned Kuroka as his first member. As the crowd of devils erupted in a familiar song of vehement disapproval, Surziches and Seraphol shared a smile. Finally, somebody with a brain. Issei and the completely revealed Kuroka walked towards the exit of the dinner. Kuroka grew tired of suppressing her feline traits and decided to just magic away any problems they caused, none, so far, much to Issei's dismay. Subtlety, he figured, wasn't one of her strong suits. On their way out, they passed another odd pair at the diner, a girl with short purple hair, wearing a cliché cartoon mustache and glasses disguise sitting across from a sleazy-looking man with black hair and a tacky Hawaiian shirt. The girl, it seemed, had just thrown what appeared to be orange juice in the man's face. "I win," the odd man said as our pair walked out. "What was up with those two?" Issei wondered aloud. "I dunno. Who cares? Let's go have some fun, Naya." "Like what? How far have you progressed your sacred gear, again?" "I can make a neat glove." "Yeah, let's work on that." "Yikes. What's the farthest you've run before this, again?" 600 meters. "Geez. You sure you're the kid who scared Surziches?" Me. Ow. Stop. You asked for it." To the outside observer, it might have looked like Issei was running and talking to himself with a weird red cosplay glove on, but to anyone who was a bit more clued in, it was an even weirder sight. Kuroka, in the form of a black house cat with two tails, was sprawled on top of his head while he tried to build some endurance. Kuroka had assured him nobody would care if he had the boosted gear out, and it would be better for his training to keep it summoned anyway, so he did. Issei Haidu, running on a pedestrian street wearing a black and red tracksuit, with a cat riding his head, wearing the gauntlet of the Welsh dragon. A spectacular sight, indeed. Completely out of steam, Issei slowed to a halt before falling to his knees. Not one to waste time, he skipped the part where he stood back up and went straight to laying on the ground, face first. Luckily for him, he'd reached the city park and he fell onto grass instead of concrete. "You're a pussy." "That's rich, coming from a cat." "Fine. You're a vagina." Issei laughed, once again beaten to the punch by Kuroka. "I hate you." Kuroka, still a cat, yawned in boredom and stretched out on his back. "After you get back up, we can work on weights. Even juvenile dragons are normally crazy strong. You're kinda lacking, Naya." Issei groaned into the dirt before replying. "You know, people keep calling me dragon this and dragon that, but I'm definitely not a dragon. I had a human mother and a human father." "Yeah, but you've got the soul of a dragon. With a little senjutsu magic once you're stronger, we can bring you closer to your spirit form, per se. You're gonna turn me into a dragon." "You're already a dragon, Naya. I'm gonna make you feel like one." "That sounds permanent." "Not nearly as much as you think, actually. It would happen naturally anyway as you grow into your power, but thanks to yours truly, we can accelerate the process. But, before that, more training." Another groan. "Issei? Is that you?" From inside the park, a woman's voice made itself known. Kuroka's head shot up, half expecting a devil to have found her. Instead, it was just a scantily clad fallen angel, and a ridiculously weak one at that. She had her wings hidden, but was wearing a BDSM outfit like it was normal. Standard fallen angel. Kuroka laid back down, unfazed. Issei raised his face by less than 20 degrees, just enough to see who he was being addressed by. It was a girl who'd asked him out not 2 weeks earlier. He'd denied her, but he couldn't really remember why, thought he supposed it was a good thing. He could never have gone out with Kuroka if he'd been dating Yuma. "Yuma? What the hell are you wearing?" Issei asked, not bothering to lift his head or anything else anymore. Workout clothes." Yuma replied, suddenly very self-conscious. She quickly and subtly summoned a plain black t-shirt and athletic shorts, slipping them over her fallen angel attire in such a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. "But, that aside, why are you on the ground?" "I was working out too. Now I'm not. The grass looked nice." "Is that a cat on your back?" Yes. Yeah, I found her a few days ago and she just won't go away. I've taken a liking to her. Her name is Kuroneko." Issei felt sharp claws dig into his back at the pun, but he was smiling too hard to care. For those of you in the audience who don't quite understand, in spoken Japanese, the words black and cat are Kuro and Neko, respectively. Hence, Kuroneko is literally just a goofy way of saying black cat, not to mention being a semi-homonym with Kuroka's actual name. Coincidentally, it was also the name of one of Issei's favorite classic horror movies. A moment passed, Yuma not really acknowledging the statement. Then, she noticed his arm. Is that? Issei, what's on your hand, exactly?" Yuma said, just now realizing the boy had a sacred gear out in public. There were people not even 30 meters away, he was near a pedestrian sidewalk, in broad daylight. "Oh, that? It's a cosplay. I'm not stupid, I know what a twicertical looks like. Why do you have that out? What if a normal person sees you?" At this, Issei raised his head, looking Yuma in the eyes. You know what a sacred gear is? And hey, weren't you just wearing like 1/3 of a swimsuit? Don't lecture me on being weird in public. Yuma blushed, having been called out. Around other fallen, she was totally fine wearing that, but with Issei. Not so much. That's different. But, yes. I know what a sacred gear is. She hadn't expected to see him on her patrol, so she hadn't really been worried about it. Oh. Neat. Well, it's not a twice critical, or whatever. It's the boosted gear, so I'm told. Rainer staggered backwards, almost falling over her feet. The boosted gear. No wonder Kakabiel was worried about this kid. She mentally squashed any plans she'd been harboring about hurting Issei. She could never take on a Longinus, especially that one. No, the only viable option now was to report back to Kakabiel. No, not even Kakabiel. Azazel. If Kakabiel were to complete his plan and attack this town, Issei would absolutely rally to defend it, and even the Angel of the Stars would lose against the might of the Red Dragon. Forget options concerning Issei or the girl with Twilight healing, her only option for survival at this point was to go straight to Azazel and rat on Kakabiel. Yuma? You okay? Issei asked, noticing her worried expression. What? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Hey, it was good talking to you, but I gotta run. See you later. Yuma said sweetly, jogging further into the park. As soon as she was out of Issei's sight, she teleported away. Was it just me, or was that kind of weird? No, what was weird to me is that you were just talking to a fallen angel about me like I was some stray cat, Naya. You can't object against being a stray cat and say Naya in the same sentence. It's not even a verbal thing like that, you're literally just meowing. Wait, fallen angel. You were pretty chummy with her, too. Somebody I should be worried about, Naya. I might seem aloof, but I take loyalty very seriously, Dragon Boy. No. And I do too, don't worry. She asked me out a while back, but I turned her down. We've talked, like, twice. Not counting just then. She asked you out. Yeah, but I said no. Good thing, too. A prime fallen angel tactic for killing sacred gear users is to ask them out and then just straight up murder them. Works like a charm, especially with one like that. Yikes. I think you need to tell me more about all this supernatural stuff. That sounds boring, Naya. I'll do it later. For now, more training. Issei slapped his forehead against the ground, dreading the thought of doing anything else athletic. Don't be such a baby, look. Kuroka hopped off of Issei's back and walked around to stand in front of his head, then pushed both her tails against his face. I'm not ticklish, if that's what you're going for. That's depressing, but no. Stop talking and just breathe normally for a second. Issei did as she asked, and within moments, his fatigue was gone. He sat up, flexing the muscles in his legs and looking at them in wonder. Thanks Kuroka, I owe you one. Would be the correct response, Naya. Issei stood up, no longer exhausted. This was probably the first time he'd been so worn out. Kuroka's response to hearing that he'd been barely athletic at all, ever, was to say, you can start with 5 kilometers then, Naya. Neither he nor his legs were a fan of the abusive regimen. Yeah, thanks. Still blows my mind that magic is real. Yeah, it's pretty great. I accept praise in the form of spooning and kittens, just so you know. Well, I can't do either of those right this second, but how about a chin scratch? The what? Hey, just because I look like a cat. Mid-sentence, Issei scooped up Kuroka and began lightly scratching her chin. A time-tested trick just about all cats loved. His mom taught him that you could get just about any cat to chill out by scratching its chin or the top of its head. Kuroka, it appeared, was no exception. Issei filed that information away for further use and mentally proposed the hypothesis that doing the same thing in her human form probably wouldn't work as well. Probably. Breathe in deep, breathe out slowly. Feel the environment around you. Senjutsu is less power and more energy. It's not all flash and thunder like other schools of magic. It's all in the technique. Issei sat cross-legged at the foot of a decrepit mountain shrine in a thick forest, his eyes closed and face contorted in focus. Kuroka paced around him in her standard black robe, holding a traditional fan and waving it around for emphasis. She claimed it would help focus the energy in the area, but Issei was convinced she just liked playing with it. No, not like that. You're trying too hard. Just chill. That's all there is to it, just relax. Issei's twisted face slowly relaxed. He was trying to put as much effort as possible into meditating, which defeats the whole purpose. His breathing was steady and purposeful, but he still wasn't getting it. Not quite, but that's more like it. Kuroka sat down behind Issei and wrapped her legs around his own. She was essentially the big spoon in a meditative pose, with her chest against his back and her waist against the back of his. Issei had his hands on his knees in the way you've seen 1,000 times on TV. Index finger and thumb connected, with all the other fingers stretched out. A typical monk pose. Kuroka's hand snaked around and entwined with his own, pulling them into a prayer clasp just in front of his chest. Her cat features were out in full force, and her tail swished around as playfully as ever, despite her authoritative teaching methods. The blush grazed Issei's face as he felt Kuroka wrap herself around him. "How's this supposed to help me relax?" Issei asked, not really understanding the point what Kuroka was doing that was going to make him relaxed, but enjoying it nonetheless. "Stay quiet. Feel my breathing. Just relax." Kuroka nestled her head in the crook of Issei's neck above his right shoulder, and he began to feel her soft and even breaths rise in perfect time with his own. "Now close your eyes and listen." At Kuroka's instruction, Issei shut his eyes and tuned his hearing into the smallest noise he could find. The babble of a small stream, just behind them. Some birds were singing, off to their left somewhere. Crickets were chirping, locusts were humming, mosquitoes were buzzing. The forest was lush with noise if one just stopped to hear it. Do you feel it? All around us. Life. In the ground, in the sky, in the trees and grass and bushes. Everything here, everything living, radiates life energy. Kai. That's the core of Senjutsu. Life itself. Look. Open your eyes. Issei slowly opened his eyes and followed where Kuroka was dragging his hand. An infant flower, sprouting up from the ground just in between his legs. Kuroka guided his hands into a cup shape on either side of the tiny flower. Imagine all that life energy surrounding you and I and everything else here flowing through your hands and over that flower. Issei closed his eyes once more and began to truly meditate. He envisioned the Kai of the forest flowing down into and over his hands like water from a faucet. It wasn't green, as one would expect, but a vibrant white, awash with every conceivable color, all cascading in a incandescent and immaculate dance of pure beauty. An indescribably radiant warmth passed through his hands and felt the Kai blossom from his palms and descend over the flower stalk. He pictured growth, good things, and deep roots, untouched by the frost. He thought of life and warmth and happiness, and he asked the forest to share some of its energy with the young flower. "Beautiful, dragon boy. Open your eyes." Issei opened his eyes, ceasing to meditate, and what he saw astounded him. The flower, which had been a budding stalk moments before, was now a gorgeous camellia in full bloom. Issei, unable to speak, turned to Kuroka with a bewildered look in his eyes. Kuroka smiled back with the purest and joyful expression he'd seen in a long time. After all, she knew what it was like. Connecting to the life energy that pure was almost euphoric. She was more than happy to share that feeling with him, and she was proud that he'd accomplished so much on his first try. Of course, she didn't say any of that because she didn't have to. The two of them were still connected. Not just physically, but with Senjutsu. And Issei realized he could feel everything she was feeling. "Congrats, kiddo. You've touched life for the first time," Kuroka said, directly into his mind. She didn't say a word out loud, she merely leaned her head against the side of his own. "This is incredible," Issei replied mentally, exhilarated by his first use of Senjutsu. He didn't have the first clue on how they were suddenly communicating via telepathy, but he found himself instinctively knowing how to talk back. "It only gets better. But, be careful. You can't hide anything when we're connected like this. I can feel everything you feel." "Then, can you feel this?" Issei turned his head to Kuroka and cupped her cheek, then kissed her on the lips before she had even a second to react. He poured pure affection into their emotional connection, shocking Kuroka. Between the overflow of emotion and the kiss itself, her mind was whirling, but she felt at ease and melted into the kiss after a brief moment. It was quick and certainly not very intense, but they both relished every second. Issei pulled back, looking into Kuroka's golden eyes and seeing nothing but happiness. Her face was alight with a pink blush, but her smile was bright enough to blind. "Nobody's ever done that before, Naya," Kuroka said, breathless. "Kissed you? Well, me neither, but I didn't want to say anything. Was it bad, or?" "No, not just the kiss. I meant, nobody's ever given me a feeling like that before. It felt so good, like what love is supposed to feel like." Kuroka's voice caught in her throat. She wasn't one to talk about stuff like that, she never had been, not once in her life. She was in completely new territory, but for some reason, she couldn't help but say those things to Issei. "Well, I haven't been in love before, and we've only known each other for a little less than a week, but maybe it's not so far off." Issei, like Kuroka, had never been in a romantic relationship before, so he was playing the situation by ear, and if it wasn't for the fact that he was connected to the life force of an entire ancient forest, he probably would have been far too nervous to make a move like that or say any of the things he was saying. But at the moment, he had no secrets. "Maybe not. Only one way to find out. You're stuck with me now." Keep fooling around like that and I'll fall for you for good, Naya. You know, I'd like nothing more. That should just about do it. Serziches and Serafal stood at the foot of the new Bune household, a large mansion built atop where the old one had been. It had been in perfect condition, but Serafal had figured Issei probably wouldn't have been comfortable living in a house that used to be someone else's. So, in true devil fashion, they'd torn the whole mansion down and built another one right atop where it had been, all in the space of a couple of days. It was in the middle of the Bune territory, thousands of square kilometers of land with perfect conditions for dragons. The northernmost edge of the territory was a mountain named Scaleheart Peak, relatable in size and difficulty to the mountain humans referred to as K2. Of course, it wasn't nearly as difficult for the average devil, partly being due to their inherent ability to fly, and the previous Bune clan often used it for training. The vast majority of the non-mountainous land was a forest, denser in the west and sparse in the east, and filled with various species of both real and mythical wildlife. The Bune territory was bordered by the familiar forest to the south, with no real dividing line, so the fauna was generally the same. The Bune mansion itself was in the exact center of the territory, in a rather large forest clearing just northwest of Bronze Lake, named for the breed of dragons who make it their home, and several days' hike from the Scaleheart mountain range. Serziches and Serafal had completely redone the household, including all facilities nearby. A mountain home, a lake house, and, most notably, a lot of wildlife housing. Dragon stables, chimera dens, hydra dungeons. Well known for their work with dragons, their renown hardly stopped there. If it existed, the Bune family had tamed it at some point. Since the family's unfortunate extinction, the facilities had languished and rotted, so a remake was necessary if Issei were to fulfill Serzich's hope of truly taking up the mantle of Bune. According to his intelligence, the boy's mother had been a veterinarian, and his own proclivity for animals was what helped him save Kuroka in the first place. Combine that with his draconian nature, and the beast-taming clan of Bune would be a perfect fit for the young man. So Zetches, what's the play? I was hoping you'd ask. Are you nervous? No, why? Because your hands are totally clammy, Naya. Issei was lying in a corner of his Levesiat, with his feet propped over the other side. Kuroka, being significantly smaller in stature, was comfortably placed on top of him, almost like she was laying in a hammock. Issei's head was on her right shoulder, his left hand crossed over her midriff, and his right hand was up in the air about a foot away from her chest. Her hands were intertwined with both of his, and it looked almost like they'd been in the middle of a waltz and fallen on the couch mid-dance. In simpler terms, they were playing a cuddly game of Twister. What Kuroka was referring to was the state of the hand she was holding. This was by far the closest the two of them had been, even including the now several times she'd slept in their bed. Issei was understandably nervous, and while he tried to play it as cool as he normally did, his hands betrayed his true feelings. Of course, Kuroka being Kuroka, her hands were somehow both cool and warm. An unfamiliar but entirely pleasant sensation to Issei. The reason they were so tied up is a relatively simple one. Issei was unfamiliar with physical contact, so Kuroka decided to get him a little more used to it. Hence, she wrapped herself around him like a blanket. Truth be told, it made him far more than a bit nervous. Clammy hands were the least of his worries. Oh, sorry. Breathe, lover boy. At Kuroka's instruction, Issei began to deepen and steady his breathing, preparing to meditate. Ever since the time a couple of days ago at the forest shrine, which Kuroka had later revealed was somewhere in Tibet, Kuroka had been randomly instructing Issei to meditate, stating that he wouldn't have time to get in a cross-legged position in the heat of a battle or chant a mantra during a tense debate. So, she'd been drilling into him the need to be able to connect with the environment at a moment's notice, anywhere and anytime, including wrapped up with her on the couch. Eager to please, Issei runs through the mental checklist of beginners in jutsu. Breath steady and deep. Check. Relax and let go of any negative feelings. Harder than one might think when wrapped up in a catgirl, but check. Reach out with your mind and feel what's around you. Check. Begin to utilize the ambient kai in pretty much whatever way you please. Or, in Issei's case, just submerge yourself in it and get used to the feeling. Check. The energy of a house in a suburban neighborhood was far more somber than in an ancient and vibrant forest, and so pretty much the only thing he could feel was Kuroka herself. She was radiating pure calm and affection and contentedness, as usual. Once she felt him reach out, Kuroka began to cycle her own calm energy into Issei. Slowly but surely, the nervousness left him, replaced by nothing but content happiness. All he could feel in his mind and in his arms, emotionally and physically, was Kuroka. You do this all the time? Issei asked out loud, blinking his eyes as if waking up from a dream. Senjutsu felt so jarringly different from the average experience, it was almost insane. Completely randomly, he realized Kuroka's hair smelled divine. Trying his best to be subtle, he silently sniffed the long black hair inches away from his face. Very rarely am I not, Naya. It comes extremely naturally to certain species of supernatural creatures. Nekoshou and dragons included. In fact, dragons even more so. Kuroka chose not to say anything, but being that they were still connected via Kai transfer, she totally heard him thinking about how good her hair smelled. She leaned her head back ever so slightly, putting it essentially on top of his nose. Issei's senses went into hyperdrive, but he didn't get nervous again. He pretty much couldn't, not with Kuroka's feel-good vibes hitting him from everywhere at once. This had been her goal, of course. To show him how to block negative energy by replacing it with positive. Of course, all of this was happening separate to their conversation, so the lesson she was teaching went relatively unlearned. He just thought she smelled nice. Wait, really? I thought you guys were like the top dogs. Sorry, top cats when it came to Senjutsu. Lame joke, and not quite. Most natural dragons are already masters of Senjutsu without even realizing it, Naya. Your kind is born from energy, from Kai in the purest form. You're not only naturally inclined to it, but it's also in your blood. That's why you're picking it up in days instead of months, kiddo. Wow, I thought it was this easy for everyone. How long did it take you to learn? A year or two. To master? Still, haven't. Not really. Pretty close though, if I do say so myself. Kuroka said, triumphantly twitching her ears. But, moving on. You can feel my calm. Can you feel anything else? Reach deep. Once again Issei focused on her, and only her, moving past the surface level feelings. He was a tad bit out of his skill range, but if what Kuroka said was true, this would come as natural to him as breathing. Calm. Happiness. Content. Affection. Attraction. The beginnings of love. Issei moved past all these feelings, searching for anything else. All of a sudden, he caught onto something else, something he can't believe he never noticed. A dark and malicious feeling, one that seemed so thick it permeated the air around him. It promised pain and avarice, and he opened his eyes with a start. He'd never felt anything so vile. What was that? Issei asked, before realizing what he was looking at. Kuroka was still sitting in his lap, but she'd turned around to face him. On her back, where normally only her tails were, there were two bat wings, fully unfurled. My true nature is a devil. I keep it hidden, but I wanted you to feel it. This is who they turned, this is who I really am. Kuroka started to say something else, but quickly changed her sentence. Issei sensed a lot of moving parts behind those cut-off words, but dismissed it for the time being. Just so you know, lover boy, this, what we're doing, isn't something you can run around and do with everyone. This connection we have at the moment, it's very intimate. For a Senjutsu user to prod around inside someone else's aura and feelings and mind, it's invasive to say the least, Naya. I guess I probably should have mentioned that before you got so damn good at it, but oh well. Issei realized she was right. He was currently inside her soul, essentially. Kuroka had only meant for him to see her nature as a devil. But, what else could she be hiding? Issei was hungry to know her better and to push his limits as far as learning more Senjutsu. A very dangerous combination. Without any warning, Issei pushed further, looking deeper inside her. He felt something almost like a wall, but barely paid it any mind. He tore past it and felt something shift. The first thing that happened was Kuroka gasped, not expecting the intrusion. The second thing that happened was Issei saw just how little he knew about Kuroka. Just how broken she was. Resentment, sadness, anger, hatred, depression, self-loathing, fear. All of it. Issei pulled out in a heartbeat, his eyes wide and heart pounding. He realized he couldn't see, and then he realized it was because he'd just been slapped out of his face. As Issei came to his senses, the first thing that cleared up was not his vision. It was his hearing. He heard a sniffle, unlike what he'd heard before. Then, once his eyes stopped being useless, he paired the noise with a sight. Kuroka, with angry tears in her eyes. Kuroka, Kuroka went to slap him again, and he tried to catch it with his left hand, but he'd forgotten just how much stronger than him she actually was. The resistance he put up was nothing more than futile, and she connected with his face without much trouble. Why would you do that? She asked quietly, betrayed. I wanted to know more about you. I just told you how intimate it was to even connect like that, and the first thing you do is dive inside my subconscious. Well, was it worth it? Do you like what you saw? Of course not. Nobody would ever want anything to do with someone like me. I'm fucked up, Issei. Like nothing you've seen. You wanted a girlfriend, not a project. Kuroka, you aren't. I try so hard to keep stuff hidden and still teach you, using every technique I ever learned to hide how I feel, and little did I know, Dragon Boy is suddenly a master and breaks past them all. Go figure. Issei, trying to calm down, reached out once more with Senjutsu, trying to send calming feelings towards Kuroka, but he found that not only could he not connect with her, it was like she wasn't there. Oh no, not again. Not even close. I know what you're gonna try and do. You're gonna try and tell me how sorry you are and how much you pity me, all with your feelings because I won't let you talk. Well, too bad. Kuroka was acting like a child throwing a tantrum, and with good reason. Not a single soul on the planet had ever seen her like Issei just had, and he'd done it without warning or permission. Her everything had just been exposed to him, and she couldn't do a damn thing about it. Boost. Boost. Issei had just seen the very darkest parts of her, every single negative emotion she'd felt since she'd killed her dad and abandoned her sister to the devils. Nobody in their right mind would ever stay with her after something like that, which was a real shame, because for the first time in her life, Kuroka was starting to feel something like love for this boy. Boost. Boost. But now she'd have to leave him, just like everyone else. She'd be on the run again, and without his political protection, the devils would be hunting her once more. She'd die as a criminal, and she'd never even get to see her sister again. Kuroka. Boost. She'd been so caught up in her feelings that she hadn't realized Issei was charging his power with a boosted gear, and so for the second time in the past 5 minutes he caught the unflappable Kuroka off guard. Using his now octupled power, he shattered the barrier she'd put around herself and forcefully connected with her Kai, reaching as far as he could into her psyche. Kuroka went rigid, not even almost knowing what to expect, but being filled with dread at the mere concept of being exposed like that again. Now, Kuroka had been fraught with worry about how Issei would feel about her, now that he knew the truth, but he had only felt one thing. Love. He wasn't unsure about it anymore. It wasn't anything close to love or something that might be love, it was love. Pure and true. Sure, he'd only known her for a week, but in that time, she'd quickly become his favorite person on earth. He could hardly stand to be in a room without her. His love burned bright and sure, a beacon amidst her tumultuous sea of despair. As Issei decimated her mental barriers and entered her mind, he told her all that and more. He told her how he'd never stop until she was whole again. He told her how he'd never leave until she saw her sister and forgave herself and stopped hating the world. He told her how he'd never forsake her, not for anything in the world, not until the rain clouds over her head shone down twice as bright as the sun. And as Kuroka looked at him with wide, vulnerable eyes, he told her how much he loved her. Issei leaned in and kissed her for the second time ever, and in their connection, he poured every ounce of himself. His love for her, his sadness at his mother's death, his fear at knowing the killer was still out there. Everything he had, she saw, just like he had her. And when he pulled away, she was no longer unsure. She loved him just as much as he loved her. Down Kuroka's face, for the first time in a very long time, ran real tears. Not like when she had been weak and in his bed and at his mercy and had cried when he asked if she was evil. No, not sad tears, nor were they terrified tears. Happy tears. Because, for the first time in the vast majority of her life, Kuroka was no longer alone. After a moment, Kuroka collapsed forward onto Issei's chest, mentally exhausted. Her breathing was terse and ragged, but she wore a smile. Issei leaned his head back against the couch, also worn out. The toll of using those boosts for Senjutsu was much higher than just making himself stronger, and the reset was much more taxing on his mind. But it had been worth it. Don't you ever do that again, Kuroka said, breathlessly. And don't you ever leave me, she said into his mind. I won't, Issei answered. Not ever. This is definitely a terrible idea. Why are we here again? I prefer to think of it as a great idea with a high chance for catastrophic failure. I'm pretty sure that's exactly what a bad idea is. You didn't answer my question. Look, do you want to be a dragon or what? Well, am I supposed to say yes? Why the hell are we here? Kuroka and Issei were in a desert. Not a dessert, as in a nice aftercourse to a good meal, but a desert, as in a massive and dry area with nothing but sand and rocks. Issei sat on one of said rocks, in a cross-legged meditation pose. Kuroka stood just behind him, offering encouragement, if one could even call it that. It's worth mentioning that the particular rock Issei was atop was itself atop another rock, this one much bigger. Also called a mountain. Not enough of a mountain to have any real name, but enough of one to make the desert climate all the worse. The poor boy was not a happy camper. Because they were in the desert, thanks to Kuroka's handy teleportation magic, it was exactly as hot as one would expect, about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Issei was sweating like a hooker in church, as one generally does in 110-degree weather, but Kuroka was completely cool. Her skin was glowing arctic white from a spell she'd placed around herself to keep from being hot. Because you're supposed to like it. You are literally a red dragon, Naya. Do you know anything about your species? Kuroka asked, her patience growing thin. I am a human boy. I'm not a dragon. That's what we're here to fix. Summon your stupid gear so we can get out of the desert. Issei, sighing in resolute annoyance, summoned his sacred gear to his arm. Before meditating, he offered thanks to whichever gods would listen that at least the weather was clear. Good. Now, just like we've been practicing. Boost 6 times and then try to reach inside your gear. A minute later, and Issei was up to 64 times his normal capacity for power. To be completely honest, Surzich's fears of a ridiculously powerful dragon emperor were much more grounded in reality at this point, as Issei could now trump all but the most seasoned yokai at Senjutsu with brute strength alone. Once he refined his technique and learned some more dangerous applications, he would be a force unlike the world had ever seen. But the single push from his mind, he could crack nearly any barrier, as seen with Kuroka 2 days prior to today's excursion into the desert, and that was the reason for it. She believed if he pushed into the boosted gear itself, he could awaken the dragon inside and empower the part of himself that yet slumbered. Or erupt in a pillar of dragon fire. Definitely not a bad idea. Issei, now almost humming with power, began to truly meditate. The desert was entirely barren, and so there was nothing for him to latch onto. Kuroka was shielding her own presence to the point where it was like she didn't exist to anything but his normal senses, and so the only thing he could really feel was himself. He noticed a subtle difference in the way the energy in his arm moved against the rest of his kai. Whereas normally the kai of a human traveled up and down the 7 chakras in a perfectly synchronized harmony, the gauntlet of the Welsh dragon acted like a positive feedback loop, taking in his normal energy and changing it somehow. But looking at how the boosted gear worked wasn't his purpose. He needed to go deeper. Focusing, Issei pushed against the palm of the gauntlet, attempting to force through the sacred gear and commune with the dragon that supposedly resided within. Kuroka had assured him this was how the feat was generally accomplished, and that he'd be able to speak with Drag, the original Welsh dragon, inside a mindscape within his own soul. As Issei pushed against the gauntlet, he felt an absolutely colossal amount of resistance. It wasn't quite as if he was pushing against something solid, it was more like something incredibly strong was pushing back. Boost. Boost. Issei, don't boost anymore. You can't handle more than that right now. Kuroka said, suddenly worried. 6 boosts were his limit, and they became exponentially harder to handle as he progressed. Not much was known about what happened when a juvenile red dragon emperor exceeded his limit, but she didn't want to find out. Issei, up to 128 times stronger than the average human, pushed against the gauntlet with renewed strength and felt something give. He tore away at the barrier of the red metal armor, but was surprised to find nothing. Then, he realized he'd been pushing against the wrong part. The power, you could say, came from the focal point of the object. The sacred gear's own single chakra. The gem, at the center. A gleaming emerald orb, set in the epicenter of the gauntlet and clearly where the power resided. Issei chided himself for not seeing it sooner. Upon trying to reach into the gem, Issei was assaulted with a wave of heat unlike anything he'd ever felt in his life. His clothes burst into flames without any warning, and he almost screamed, but something kept him in place at the gem. Further. Reach. Issei heard a chorus of voices through the fire, but he still couldn't quite reach the gem. In a quiet whisper, almost completely inaudible, Issei mumbled one word. Boost. Issei, stop. Boost. 256 times stronger than a human. Issei could now squat 16 tons with little to no issue, but that much power came at a price. His body absolutely could not handle it. He was only barely able to deal with 7 boosts. 8 was far too much. His body began to break. Dragonfire, orange and bright and furious, exploded from his body. It erupted over his skin, which itself had begun to crack and shine with crimson light. His eyes turned green, filled with an abhorrent glow. Issei was in unimaginable pain, but the gem was so close. He had almost broken through. Reach further, and I will match your resolve with my own. Show me your strength. Issei, stop, don't listen to him. I can still heal you if you stop now. Kuroka literally could not come close enough to interfere. After his 6th boost, he was a maelstrom of draconic might, and to come too close would rip her apart. Issei couldn't tell it, but he wasn't even almost containing his power. It was swirling around him in a storm of tinged crimson wind, kicking up all the dust and rocks nearby into a proto-sandstorm that spiraled up into the desert clouds. Dry lightning cracked the sky, and the horizon darkened. It had been Kuroka's idea. She wanted him to try to commune with the beast inside him, as all boosted gear wielders eventually must. Her mistake was misjudging Issei's enthusiasm. She had assumed that if it got too dangerous, he'd pull out. She was very wrong. Issei's body was literally tearing itself apart, and he was showing no signs of stopping. Boost. Boost. The gem in the center of Issei's gauntlet exploded. Incredible. Truly incredible. Issei opened his eyes to the sound of an absolutely colossal western dragon, erupting into boisterous laughter. Nothing existed where they were but himself and the dragon and fire. Is this the mindscape? Yes. Yes, indeed. You managed to brute force your way into my home, commendable indeed. No dragon emperor in history has ever sought me out. I have always bridged the gap between gear and wielder. You are tremendously talented. Unfortunately, your body shattered in the process. Your mate is currently searching for your corpse amidst the sandstorm you created. Issei's eyes went wide. He'd been so busy enjoying his praise that he almost didn't even hear the dragon's words. Sandstorm. Corpse. What? You mean? I'm dead. No, far from it. No, I dare say you'll come out of this far better off than you were before. You showed the soul of a true red dragon to me just now, so I'll show you the might of one. We'll speak again soon, Drake. Without a moment of explanation, there was a flash of emerald light and Issei's vision went black. Kuroka was nearly beside herself with panic and worry. One time. She allowed herself to get attached to someone one time. And, in the end, he'd made the same mistake so many Senjutsu wielders do. They chose power over life. She couldn't see in the sandstorm. She couldn't magic it away. It was a product of Issei's power, which was far greater than hers in strength. She was relegated to searching for the pieces of his body in blind conditions and hoping she'd find enough to put back together. She couldn't lose him. He'd seen all that she was and chose to stay anyway. She absolutely couldn't go back to being alone, not after Issei. In the stinging blindness of the sandstorm, a single tear fell down Kuroka's face. And then, she heard the roar. From the moment you're born, you know to fear a roar. Instinctually, somewhere deep down inside a human psyche, they know from the instant they leave their mother's womb that a roar means danger. This isn't a trait exclusive to humans. Dogs, cats, just about any animal with awareness. They all know to fear a powerful roar. Everything in existence fears the roar of a dragon. Kuroka nearly went insane when she heard it. She dropped to her knees and covered her ears, literally wounded by the magnitude of the sound. She wasn't the only thing affected. The air shuddered. The sandstorm ceased at once, as if the roar was regal enough to command the weather itself. In her now clear sight, Kuroka saw what had happened. Right where Issei had been, there was a juvenile red dragon writhing on the ground. No part of it was human. 4 massive legs, 2 wings that stretched at least 60 feet across, a spiked tail that wildly thrashed the sand. 2 emerald eyes that pierced her very soul. Kuroka, from her place on the ground, slowly looked up at the monster. She could hardly believe her eyes. She'd heard of a boosted gear wielder becoming dragon-like, but this was beyond anything she could have expected. Issei, is that you? She mumbled, almost inaudibly. The dragon stopped moving, honing in on her with the precision of a hawk. Kuroka. The dragon gurgled like it was a child trying to talk for the first time. It suddenly laid down on all 4 legs, looking straight at her. Oh my god. Kuroka murmured, ignoring the sharp pain that came from using the Lord's name. Kuroka. The dragon bellowed, with a happy-sounding trill at the end of the butchered name. The beast flared its gargantuan wings, casting shade over her. Issei, is that really you? Nod or something. The dragon swiftly nodded, an odd sight for a creature that was supposed to be as regal as a king. Kuroka slowly came to terms with what that meant. Issei Haidu was human no more. Are you in pain? She asked, slowly moving closer to Issei. He was huge compared to her, with her full height reaching the top of his front leg. No. Just hard talk. Like this. Feels really great. Issei spoke, slowly getting used to his new vocal cords. Don't worry. Drake taught how to turn back. But first, fly. With the speed of a bullet, Dragon Issei shot forward, plunging his head between Kuroka's legs and flinging her onto his back. With hardly even a second for the screaming cat to react, Issei shot into the desert sky, launching off the ground with 2 legs and flinging himself upward like a catapult. Like all red dragons, Issei had spines running down his back, so Kuroka held as well as she could onto them while he tore through the sky at close to the speed of sound. The poor cat had just enough mental capacity to think about how if she was a normal human, the G-force from his sudden takeoff would have probably killed her. Within just a few moments, Issei was back on the sandy ground. Kuroka jumped off his back faster than he could say wait, and the impulse for her to kiss the ground was real. Gathering her wits while Issei looked down at her, she remembered what exactly had been happening before he got dragon eye feet. Anger quickly filled her thoughts. She suspected slapping the dragon in front of her probably wouldn't have had much effect, and she didn't want to make that a habit regardless, so she held off. But she was certainly mad enough to do so. Issei had completely ignored her. He'd boosted far past his limits and gone far too deep into the sacred gear. He probably didn't even know it himself, but the boosted gear was infamous for driving its users insane, with the malice and evil of all its past users. The prime poison for a Senjutsu practitioner, especially a new and eager one with 500 times their normal strength. Kuroka figured Issei was immensely lucky he didn't trigger a juggernaut drive, and she was both furious and extremely worried for him. Issei, on the other hand, had never felt better. It was like his human body had been an egg for him to hatch out of the whole time, and now that he felt freer than ever. His new body was glorious and powerful, and he felt like he'd known it his whole life. Looking back, he couldn't believe he ever dealt with a sluggish and heavy human body for so long. The cat is angry. I'd suggest you turn back now. Don't worry, this form is your true one. You're free to take it when you wish. Drake's voice now spoke directly into his mind, rather than in a mindscape. Issei, heeding the older and wiser dragon's advice, began to shift and contort, folding unnaturally down into a normal human form. Kuroka watched with awe and disgust. It wasn't a very pleasant sight, but it was impressive. What was also impressive was how his human form had changed. He was taller by several inches and far more muscular. His skin was lightly tanned, and his eyes were a sharp green with the slit pupil of a natural predator. He had an intensity unlike any Kuroka had ever seen, and she found herself ridiculously attracted, even more so than before. You're an idiot. She snapped, unable to bring any other thoughts to life. Her mind was a swirling pool of emotions, but all she wanted was to tell Issei how stupid he was for making her worry and how elated she was that he was alright. Yeah, I know. But, I'm your idiot. Forever. Issei closed the short distance between them, taking her hands in his. Kuroka's heart hammered in her chest. She dropped the barrier around her emotions and allowed him to see what she was feeling, instead of trying to explain with words. Issei probed into her psyche, feeling the cacophony of different feelings she was experiencing. I'm sorry. I really didn't mean to worry you. I don't know what came over me. Issei said sheepishly. Yeah, me neither. We need to have a serious talk about safety when we get back. So? Mission accomplished. I'm an actual dragon, now. Or, I guess I should say I stopped pretending to be a human. It feels weird how much better I feel as a dragon, kinda. It's like I've always been one and just didn't know it. What have I been saying? The wielder of a strong dragon-type sacred gear has a dragon soul, without fail. Although, I think you're the only case ever of a literal dragon. Most people offer arms and eyes and hearts to their dragon in exchange for dragon parts. You gave Drake your whole body. A stupid move if I've ever seen one, Naya. It does sound bad, doesn't it? It was bad, you idiot. I thought you were dead. Kuroka said, pulling herself into Issei's chest. Issei chuckled, rubbing her back comfortingly. Nope, sorry. Can't get rid of me that easily. Let's go home. Without another word, Kuroka opened a teleport gate beneath them and teleported back to their home in Kuo. Wow. Issei was shirtless, wearing grey sweatpants and looking in a full-body mirror in his bathroom. Kuroka was right behind him, looking into the mirror from around his shoulder. Shortly after the incident in the desert where Issei shed his humanity, he'd passed out for nearly an entire day, then woke up and ate nearly all the raw meat left in the house. After that, he'd gone into his bathroom to look at himself in the mirror, as one does, and was surprised to say the least. Can you see better? Kuroka asked, wondering about the extent of Issei's new senses. His eyes had the most drastic outward change, going from normal brown human eyes to sharp green draconic ones. His transformation back into a human had done nothing to cull the intensity of the emerald color, and Kuroka felt like she'd melt if his eyes stayed on her too long. Yeah, I can. Like, a lot better. I can see the outline of your, Never mind. Issei swiftly stopped talking, realizing he was reaching a gray area. Of course, Kuroka wasn't one to be deterred. Oh? You can see my what, Naya? She asked in a sultry voice, tracing the outline of the kimono around her chest and pulling it ever so slightly away from her. All of a sudden, Kuroka's teasing made something click in Issei. Something he'd never felt before. He felt a sudden urge to jump her right there, consequences be damned. He felt the call of the hunt, the urge of a natural predator. His pupils tightened, focusing in on her. Now, Issei constrained himself physically, but his new body was nothing like his old one, and the way it reacted to certain stimuli was also completely different. Unbeknownst to him, he began to subconsciously release pheromones, broadcasting his urges to the only other animal in the room. Issei? Kuroka stammered, noticing an unfamiliar scent fill the area that made her feel odd. She didn't know exactly what it was, but the animal part of her knew what it meant, even if she herself didn't. She noticed the way he was staring at her, eyeing her in the mirror like she was his next meal. You know, my sight isn't all that's better. Issei mumbled, slowly turning around and walking towards Kuroka, forcing her to step backwards towards the wall. I can smell really good now, too. Once she was against the wall, he slammed his right hand against it just above her left shoulder and leaned in close. I can smell how nervous you are. With his free hand, Issei cupped Kuroka's right cheek and leaned into her neck. He inhaled, then breathed almost agonizingly hot air onto her shoulder. Without warning, Kuroka moaned. And not a painful one, either. Issei blinked. He blinked again. Then, he realized what exactly he was looking at. Kuroka's flushed face, her ragged breathing, trembling legs, and her wide eyes were all a dead giveaway, and he couldn't believe he missed it. What he was doing, trying to tease Kuroka, was having the wrong effect. It was turning her on. Issei let out a noise that sounded somewhat like a cross between a wheezing balloon and a coughing old man, and practically jumped away from her. He stumbled backwards out of the bathroom, falling through the doorframe with absolutely none of the grace and poise that normally defined his kind. Kuroka shook her head and rapidly blinked, trying to clear her mind of the fog that had settled in. She realized what had happened and suddenly felt like she'd been cheated. You coward. Come back here and finish what you started. Issei fled down the stairs, pretending not to hear her. Luckily for him, he was saved by a bell, literally. The doorbell rang just as he was planning his escape. Issei practically flew to the door, opening it with little to no regard for who could be on the other side. It was a short little girl, maybe 18, wearing what appeared to be a pink magical girl cosplay. Can I help you? Issei asked, more than just a little weirded out by the odd sight. The girl seemed to have smelled something horrible and made a gagging noise, quickly followed by tightly pinching her nose. Issei, a bit self-conscious, went to sniff the inside of his shirt, only to remember he wasn't wearing one. Oops. Do you always answer the door shirtless and smelling like dragon musk? The girl asked, not giving Issei a moment to plan his next action. Sorry. Give me just a second and I'll put something on. Issei started to move away from the door, but was stopped by the girl grabbing his wrist. Don't worry about it. She snapped her fingers, and all of a sudden he was wearing a shirt in the same pink color as her frilly cosplay. In an instant, Issei realized he wasn't dealing with some little girl. This was another devil, and she was more than likely a strong one. A quick read of her outward aura with some subtle senjutsu told him everything he needed to know, and his demeanor quickly shifted from one of good-natured embarrassment to stone-cold professionalism. Of course, he could only be so serious in a shirt that said support your local magical girls. But, the thought was there. Do you know who I am? The girl asked, looking at Issei with something vaguely resembling a professional attitude. The devil. Issei answered, choosing not to give away any more information than he had to. A quick outreach with senjutsu told him that Kuroka was already safely hidden somewhere, which means he was once again facing a potentially high-ranking devil by himself. Of course, this time he was more than ready. That's right. Seraphol Leviathan, one of the 4 great devil kings, at your service. Seraphol said, dipping into a bow. Issei didn't bow back, instead choosing to remain stony and unreactive. Issei Haidu. To what do I owe the pleasure, your highness? He asked, voice dripping with barely contained sarcasm. Don't be a dick. I'm not nearly as uptight as Etches, so there's no need to be on your guard. Seraphol replied, tapping a newly summoned heart wand against her right index finger. Of course, Issei knew exactly what that meant. In reality, it had been almost a rookie mistake on Seraphol's part. She'd just broadcasted to him exactly what she intended to do. She was baiting him into dropping his guard so she could get an accurate gauge on the Red Dragon Emperor's mental and physical state. Naturally, it didn't work. Issei remained very on guard, so to speak. Well, not quite. He made the appearance of loosening up, but it was just another mask on top of a mask. He let out a sigh and put on a real-looking smile. Good to hear. Care to come inside? Sure. Seraphol, all of a sudden bubbly and bright, skipped in through the open door. Issei watched her enter, then looked down at the piece of garbage she'd magicked onto him. Huffing in distaste, he closed the door and followed her inside. Kuroka was nowhere to be seen, thankfully. Issei was sure she'd felt Seraphol's presence or at least looked outside a window because she'd successfully hidden herself far away. Make yourself at home. Issei said, and Seraphol leapt onto one of the couches, ignoring any notion of manners. So why are you here? Serziches said he wouldn't be bothering me. He said he wouldn't make any move against you. Gotta read between the lines. But regardless, this isn't anything like that. To cut right to the chase, you have Kuroka here, right? Upstairs, I'm guessing. Hiding herself with senjutsu because she knows I'd sense it if she were to teleport. Seraphol looked Issei in the eyes without so much as a blink, and while her tone was upbeat, her poise dared Issei to refute or lie to her. Yeah. She is. Issei answered shortly. His green eyes constricted in anticipation of combat, and his slit pupils narrowed. The ambient temperature of the room began to rise, and, not that he really knew it, but Issei's blood itself was somewhere around 200 degrees Fahrenheit at that moment, just under the boiling point. What of it? You aren't a normal sacred gear user, are you? You're too much dragon. Seraphol tipped her nose up and narrowed her eyes, sensing something off about Issei. Too much and then some. He growled, flashing a mouth full of jagged teeth. His patience grew thin, and he was starting to perceive a threat. Even with everything she'd seen and done, dragons still sent a chill down Seraphol's spine. A dragon's unbridled rage was one of the most destructive forces in existence, and she still remembered the horrors inflicted by Dragon Albion during the Great War. Even a fledgling dragon could kill ultimate-class devils, circumstantially. Not knowing what exactly Issei was, Seraphol began to understand why Serziches was so hesitant to start a fight with this particular dragon emperor. He seemed to have taken on some of the traits of a dragon, which isn't particularly uncommon amongst dragon gear users. She hoped he hadn't taken on their malice. Okay, cool it. Even I'm not crazy enough to walk in a literal dragon's den and walk out with his treasure. I'm here to make you an offer, one that'll benefit both of us. Swallowing her apprehension, Seraphol seemed to switch into some kind of diplomatic tone halfway through her sentence, and Issei really couldn't get a beat on her. Inhaling and exhaling slowly, Issei brought himself back to a calm. I'm listening. Here's the thing. As I'm sure you know by now, Kuroka never should have been a criminal. But her father was a high-ranking man with a lot of friends, and even when it made our blood boil, we were essentially forced to sentence her. As it stands, she's to be killed on sight if seen, even if actively hunting her has ceased, and she's never to be allowed in the underworld again under threat of death. But you knew all that, right? Issei's right eye twitched. Yeah. Right. So. Here's the thing. Recently, a family of devil dragon tamers known as the Bune became extinct. They were one of the original 72 pillars, and while I'm sure you don't know what that means, let me be the first to tell you that it's a big deal. A house going extinct now is bad. What does that have to do with me? Not one for talk, huh? Alright. Put simply, we want you to take up the mantle of Bune and become a devil. Kuroka is pardoned as a member of your peerage, and you become a high-class devil with all the benefits of such a title. Issei nearly choked on his own tongue. They wanted him to become a devil. Was that even possible? Need some more details. Of course you do. I'm as impatient as you are, don't worry. You'll be able to finish school at Kuo University if that's what you want, and whenever you so choose, you'll be able to move into the Bune territory in the underworld. That sounds worse than it is, I promise, but I personally guarantee you'll love it. Kuroka, obviously, is free to move as she wishes once she's pardoned and a member of your peerage. You'll be given full stature as a young high-class devil, and also the head of the Bune pillar. That means a seat on the Devil Council once you've proven yourself, and also a spot in the rating games once your peerage is assembled. Before I go any further, there is one additional condition. But I understand if you have questions. I'll ask after. What's the catch? Well, at the moment, only devils can participate in the rating games. Has Kuroka told you what those are? Something between a gladiatorial deathmatch and a sporting event. Right. Well, here's the deal. Remember Serzich's sister, Ria's? Vaguely. She's in an arranged marriage, and both she and Serziches hated. The guy is a total prick and a douchebag, name's Riser Phoenix, heir to the Phoenix Pillar. You want me to kill him? Seraphol burst out laughing. No. Well, kinda, and I like the gusto, but no. At present, the only way out is for her to beat him in a rating game, but simply put, there's no way that'll happen. Serziches wants you to briefly join her team as a ringer, and then take up the Bune mantle. Think of it like a worldwide introduction. You kick Riser's ass on worldwide TV, then be all like roar, I'm the Red Dragon and the heir of Bune. And then the crowd goes nuts. All's right with the world, and we all go home happy. Sounds great, but you're forgetting something. What's that? What if I don't want to be a devil? Seraphol paused, expecting the reaction. Then, unfortunately, I'd have to treat both you and anyone you're harboring as a fugitive, as a threat, and eliminate you. Suffice it to say, you're in a hairy position, and this is your only out. I can see why you might not want to throw away your humanity, but… Ha. Issei began to laugh, stopping Seraphol cold. You know, a week ago, I'd say you're right. But now, you've got a misconception. Issei stood and shed his human form. His clothes burned away in an instant, and his skin fell away like paper match, revealing crimson scales. His human limbs shifted and cracked and gave way to superior dragon ones. His head extended into a snout, and his wings sprouted from his back. The smell of fire and ashes filled the air, and flames licked up from his partially open maw. Seraphol watched with mute horror. She flashed back to the Great War. She'd fought Drake himself during a battle, and without getting into details, she'd nearly been killed just by being around the calamity they called the Red Dragon Emperor. Once he'd been sealed, she thought she'd never have to worry about seeing him ever again, except in her nightmares, but here he was. Alive, in the flesh. The spitting image of the Welsh dragon himself. Not just a sacred gear user. A true red dragon. Issei took up the room, coiling himself around Serafal like a serpent, with his head coming to a halt just in front of her face. I've already tossed aside my humanity. My armor is like tenfold shields, my teeth are swords, my claws spears, the shock of my tail a thunderbolt, my wings a hurricane, and my breath is death. What more do you have to offer me? The house shook under the force of Issei's proclamation, and Serafal struggled not to flee in terror. This is a teenager, she kept reminding herself. He can't possibly hurt me, dragon or not. But in her heart, she felt doubt. Swallowing her fear, Serafal replied. You want offspring, don't you? I'm sure Kuroka does. Do you really think you can raise kids on the run? Do you want to bring kids into the world, knowing their mother and father could be hunted and killed at any time? Dragon slayers, though few and far between, still exist. You aren't invincible, and you can't protect her from everything. I offer you security and a life of opulence. Issei growled. A low, menacing rumble that shook the house to its foundation and ruffled Serafal's clothes. Slowly, deliberately, he began to shrink back down into his human shape, never breaking eye contact with the frightened Devil King. Do we have a deal? Serafal asked once Issei was back to normal, sitting across from her. I've got to think about it. Come back in a day. Without another word, Serafal stood up, Issei mirroring her. Very well. I hope you make the right choice, Red One. And, as an adult to child instead of as a king to a dragon. I'm sorry we've put you in this situation, Issei. I hope someday you'll both forgive us. Serafal disappeared into a light blue magic circle, teleporting away. As soon as Issei felt all the devil aura in the house was gone, he exhaled heavily. Turning from this form to that was, at this stage in his development, exhausting. Well, in reality, it was the turning back into a human that was exhausting, but he couldn't very well prance around his suburban neighborhood as a drake, no matter how much he wanted to. Kuroka quietly stepped down the stairs, a crestfallen look on her face. You heard? Issei asked, not moving. Everything. She replied. What do you think? You would be forever barred from heaven. A creature of sin, just like me. Did you get a choice? No. I was born from a human father and yokai mother, and when my dad became a devil, so did I wasn't old enough to have a choice. Kuroka sat beside Issei on the couch, her back to his. Do you regret it? Every second of every day. It tore my family apart and made into what I am today. For a while, I hated it. She said hesitantly, not used to talking about her feelings openly like this. But I think now I'm alright with the way things turned out. If I never became a devil, I never would have met you. I don't know what to do. I don't either. You gave up your chance for a normal life to keep me around for a while. You gave up your body just so you could protect me if the time came to fight. I think it would be selfish of me to ask anything more of you. If you don't want to be a devil, it's fine. And what do you think about being my slave? Honestly, it's terrifying. I suffered my whole life at the hands of a corrupt devil, and I don't know if I could handle being in anyone's peerage ever again. But, with you, I doubt I'd have to worry so much. If you ask me to, I'll be your queen. We'd be going right back into the lion's den. You'd be amongst the people you hate. And by the side of the person I love, Naya. Issei, look at me. Spinning around on the couch, Issei faced Kuroka. She smiled brightly at him and clasped both his hands in hers. We've been together, what, 2 weeks? Something like that, yeah. This has literally been the best 2 weeks of my life, and that's not an exaggeration. The thought of leaving you just because you decided to become a devil is awful, Naya. And if you choose not to, and we become an enemy of the devils, then we'll just run together. No matter what, I'm with you till the end of the line. You'd better take responsibility for that, dragon boy. I'm really glad to hear that. I think I've made up my mind. I knew you would. Guess we're moving, huh? You're gonna be so sexy with devil wings. So, I guess we should go say hi to Rias. And Kaneko, of course. Kuroka widened her eyes. Seriously? That's totally risky, I don't think. I promised you I'd let you meet Kaneko again. I don't intend to let that go, and I think now would be the perfect time. School is just about over for the day, I think. Humming a tune, Rias stuck her key into the Occult Research Club's door. She didn't remember locking it, but she did so without thinking about it from time to time, so she didn't really see it as a cause for concern. She swung the right side of the double doors open and threw her book bag to the ground beside her. Then, she realized something wasn't quite right. No, more than that. Something was incredibly wrong. There was someone in her chair at her desk. A teenage boy, maybe a bit older than her, with brown hair and bright green eyes. "Hey. How's it going?" the boy asked, flashing her a peace sign. His legs were up on the desk and he looked as relaxed as could be. He was wearing a Kuo uniform with the buttons opened and a red shirt underneath. A black cat with two tails sat on his lap, its piercing golden eyes looking straight into hers. Riaz couldn't sense a thing about them and hadn't even realized they were there till she saw them, and that meant she was safe. They were mundane. He was a human, and while the cat was odd, it wasn't completely unheard of for a cat to have two tails. "Can I help you?" Yeah. I'm looking for Riaz Gremory and was told this was where she'd be. The school's dean gave me the key," the boy said, twirling it around on his index finger. "You found her. Can I ask why you're in my chair, with your feet propped up like you're at home?" To be honest, it was nowhere near the most important thing in this situation, but it irked her that he'd come into her room and use her chair without a manner in the world. "What, seriously? You don't want to know my name, or why I'm here?" "Well, to be honest, I thought you'd already know, but whatever." Issei put his feet on the ground, but didn't stand up. "Alright, enlighten me. What's a random boy doing in my clubroom?" "Must have been something pretty pressing, if you were simply given the key." Riaz sat on one of the couches, in front and perpendicular to the desk. "Well, not really. I just wanted to introduce myself, since we'll be working together soon." "Working? Together? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Is this about the festival?" "Not quite. What's the guy's name again?" Riser." Riaz stood up, eyes wide. "Who are you?" "Issei Haidu, Red Dragon Emperor. Soon to be Issei Bune, I guess." Riaz's eyes widened even more and she subconsciously stepped backwards towards the door. This was the boy that had scared her brother. This was the one who'd worried Surziches so much he asked Riaz to move out of Kuo for a while. And that meant that the cat on his lap was SS-class murderer, Kuroka. Riaz blanched. She couldn't even sense an ounce of supernatural power. But then what Issei said caught up to her. "Issei Bune. Does that mean you've chosen to accept Surzich's proposal? You'll become a devil?" Riaz asked, hopeful. Issei sighed, then smiled. "Sure, why not? I've got nothing better going on. Seraphol Leviathan was at my house just a while ago and I told her to wait a day for me to decide. But I made up my mind faster than I thought and I was hoping you could phone her for me or something. I'm not the most patient guy in the world." "I can do that, sure. I have to ask, though. Is that Kuroka?" "Yup." "How's it going, Sister Stealer?" Kuroka asked, still in cat form on Issei's lap. She spoke with a mixture of sarcasm and malice, and it didn't take much for Issei to tell that Kuroka resented Riaz for stealing Kaneko away. At the same time, she'd have been put to death or on the run if Riaz hadn't, but that didn't stop Kuroka from being angry. Riaz nodded, not answering. "If you'll excuse me then, I'll go contact King Surziches and Lady Leviathan. I'd tell you to make yourself at home, but you seem to have that down already. My queen will be here shortly." With that, she stepped out, closing the door behind her. "Sister Stealer. Good first impression." "Forget that, did you see the look on her face when she thought a random human was in her chair for no reason? Priceless." Kuroka cackled on Issei's lap, enjoying having antagonized the retarded princess. Issei was originally just going to sit on a couch, but it had been her idea to take Riaz's chair. The door opened, and a black-haired Japanese girl stepped inside, dressed in the same Kuo uniform as Riaz. "Hi," Issei said, waving. "Hi." The girl answered back, waving with a bright smile. A quick pulse of Senjutsu told Issei that the girl was packed full of negative emotions even more than Kuroka, but even just his normal, Red Dragon senses told him that she was nervous at the moment. "Are you the queen?" "That I am. Akeno Himejima. Pleasure to meet you both, Mr. Haidu, Miss Kuroka." "Pleasure's all mine," Issei said, grinning. "Where's my sister?" Kuroka asked, not wasting time on niceties. "She should be joining us shortly, as soon as King Surziches and Lady Seraphol arrive." "They're coming so soon?" Issei asked, surprised. After you apparently scared Lady Seraphol, Surziches wants to speak to you personally." "Whoops." Issei said, pursing his lips. "Nothing to be worried about. He's happy you decided to accept. We all are. Tell me about Riser." "All I know is that he's a prick and Ria's fiancé." Akeno's face visibly contorted in disgust. "Prick doesn't even begin to cover it. He's a disgusting lecher and prevent, and his whole peerage is a harem. Ahem. He's awful. How did Riaz manage to get herself engaged to someone like that? He's the heir to the House of Phoenix, so the higher-ups want he and Riaz to make strong children for the good of all devils." Issei, unable to hide how he really felt, sneered. The dragon in him abhorred the idea of being under control, and even the thought of being trapped in a marriage like that disgusted him. The Kendo noticed his expression. Yeah, I feel the same way. We've been challenged to a raiding game to win her freedom, but I didn't think we had a chance until you got here. From what I've been told, you'll be joining us for the game. Yup. I don't know the first thing about that stuff, but if it's laying the smackdown on an acid, I'm all for it. Little did anyone know, Issei held a personal hatred for that type of man. His father had apparently been a cheating bastard, and so Issei viciously resented anyone who'd violate the sanctity of a relationship. Before Akeno could say anything else, Rias came back into the room, flanked by both Surziches and Serafal. Issei, deciding to abandon the chair in favor of at least a little decency, stood up when they came up. He didn't bow like Akeno did. It takes a special kind to make a dragon kneel. But, he stood. As he got up, Kuroka did some acrobatics and ended up on top of his left shoulder. I'm beyond glad you decided to join us, Issei. Surziches said, reaching out to shake the boy's hand. Issei returned the gesture, and the two sat opposite one another on the couches. A quick read of the man's aura told him Surziches really was glad, though he didn't doubt that someone like the Devil King could hide what he was actually feeling without much effort. I figured it'd be a good idea, and I for one can't stand injustice. Issei said, nodding at Rias, who returned the gesture with a smile. Of course, both Devil Kings knew exactly what he was referring to, and it wasn't Ria's marriage. Neither can I. But, we'll put that aside for now. Let's talk details. Surziches said, placing a piece of paper on the coffee table between the two couches. Issei looked down at it and saw that it was a contract, a cartoonish one with a big space at the bottom for his signature. This is mostly ceremonial, of course, but it has legal weight amongst devils. Upon signing this, you will inherit the mantle of Bune and the title of high-class devil, and you'll be reincarnated as a devil with a special item called a king piece, imbued with the essence of the Bune pillar itself. You will remain a dragon, of course, but you will also be a devil. You will take sole command of the Bune estate and all properties therein, and will also be given a peerage of your own, with a fully pardoned Kuroka as your first member, to be assigned whatever role you deem fit. In addition, you will join Ria's Gremory as a temporary member of her peerage to win the raiding game with Riser Phoenix. Do you accept these terms? Surziches handed a quill pen to Issei, who looked down at the pen and the paper laid before him. He glanced at the cat on his shoulder, who was looking right back at him with resolve in her eyes. I accept. Issei said, looking at Surziches. The king nodded and gestured his open palms to the paper on the table. Issei noticed there was no ink and realized what he had to do. Elongating his right index finger into a claw, he sliced open his left wrist and dipped the quill pen under the resulting drop of blood. Issei Haidu he signed, and both the paper and pen disappeared. Surziches, Rias, and Akeno smiled, and Serafal breathed a sigh of relief. Wonderful. I hope you aren't busy for the next few days. Your reincarnation will be as soon as possible, tomorrow if able, as well as a few days of classes to catch you up to speed on everything a devil needs to know. Soon after that, in just 9 days from now, you will participate in the raiding game, and very soon after you make your first public appearance as the heir of the Bune house during the game, you'll be coronated as the head of the pillar. It's sure to be an exciting time. Do I have to go now? Issei asked, not really wanting to hurry up and leave his mother's house. No, of course not. You may stay here till tomorrow at this time, if you wish, but we must begin soon. We've quite a lot of work to do. Rest assured, you can still live here if you wish. We aren't going to demolish your house, or anything like that. Issei sighed in relief. He'd lived in that house his whole life, and he'd hate to just leave. Thank you so much, Issei. Ria said, almost unable to contain her happiness. For so long she'd been resigned to having to marry Riser, but now, it finally looked like she had a chance. Don't thank me yet. Lot of stuff to do. Issei said, waving her off with a kind smile. But, Surziches, aren't you forgetting something? Surziches looked puzzled for a moment, but it didn't take him long at all to get what the boy meant. Ah, yes, of course. He looked at Kuroka, still on Issei's shoulder. As of right now, you are now a free woman, Kuroka. I hereby pardon you of all crimes and instate you as a free devil. Congratulations. Thank you, Naya. It's been a long time coming. Tell my sister what really happened. Surziches nodded. I will. And please, accept my humblest apologies. You never should have been cast out like that. Surziches bowed his head in genuine apology, and Serafal followed suit. Kuroka didn't respond. Issei wasn't surprised. The people who'd ruined her life and very nearly ordered her death suddenly apologizing to her must have created some very conflicting emotions. Well, I'd say that just about wraps things up. Surziches stood up, and everyone else did too. Rias and I will be in contact with you tomorrow, Issei. Until then. They shook hands one more time. Yeah, see you then. With that, Issei left the room. But he didn't leave the building. Reaching out with his senses, he felt for someone just like Kuroka. It didn't take much for him to find her. Outside, just below a large tree, and, quite conveniently, just below a nearby window. "Whoa, Issei, I changed my mind," Kuroka said telepathically. Confused, Issei spoke back. "What? I thought you wanted to see your sister." "Well yeah, but what if she doesn't want to see me?" Issei felt Kuroka's aura, and he understood. She was terrified. More so than he'd ever seen. And, begrudgingly, he understood why. If they hadn't left on the best of terms, and all Kaneko's negative feelings about her sister had been allowed to stagnate, she really might not want to meet Kuroka again, and being refuted after all this time would be heartbreaking. It would be the same if Issei's dad suddenly walked into his house. Would Issei be happy to see him? Hell no, under no circumstances. "No, sorry. We're going down there." But at the same time, this was different. Kuroka wanted nothing more than to see her sister again, and even if it hurt her, Issei was going to make sure it happened. "Issei, seriously, wait." Before she could do anything, Issei leapt from the window, landing just beside the startled Kaneko. She jumped up from her place on the ground and ready to fighting stance. Issei put his hands up in surrender, defusing the situation. "Not here to fight, little one. Somebody's wanted to talk to you for a very long time, and I'm here to make it happen," Issei said, confusing the white-haired girl. "Do you know me?" Kaneko asked, in a deadpan. "Not personally," Issei replied. "But somebody I'm very close to does." Grimacing, Issei yanked Kuroka out from behind his back, where she'd taken root in his shoulders with sharp claws. "Your cat?" Kaneko asked, beginning to be weirded out by this random stranger. "Quit being a dick, Kuroka. You're making me look weird," Issei said, flicking the normal-looking cat on the back of the head. She'd hidden her second tail and added white and brown spots to her fur, hoping to appear as an unassuming house cat. Sighing inwardly in resignation, Kuroka transformed back into a human. Kaneko, eyes wide, backed up a step. "Hey Kuroka," she whispered. You've gotten so big," Kuroka said, trying to keep her voice steady. This was the first time in years she'd seen her sister, and while she was scared beyond belief, she couldn't help but be proud of how the girl had grown. "How the hell are you here? You're a criminal," Kaneko said, shouting. Kuroka winced, but didn't let that deter her. "Actually, I just got pardoned by Surziches. I'm now a free devil, for a few days anyway." "Why? Why are you free?" Kaneko suddenly yelled, nearly screaming at her sister. "You killed our dad." Kuroka grit her teeth. She'd known this was coming, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Issei pat her on the back, trying to offer some comfort, then slept away. This was her moment, and he didn't need to intrude. "You couldn't control yourself, and you murdered him. Why did they let you go free?" Kaneko questioned, tears of rage in her eyes. "Because, the reason I killed him. He was hurting you. He was experimenting on you." "You lie. You killed him because you got drunk on power trying to use Senjutsu." Kuroka had always wondered what lies her father's allies would feed Kaneko, and now she knew. Power drunk off Senjutsu, and killed her own father. Right, as if. No. I killed him because he was obsessed with creating a super devil, even at the expense of his own two daughters. He drove mom away and tortured me for years in the name of science. I couldn't let that happen to you, so at the first sign of trouble, I did what I had to do. No matter what it cost me," Kuroka said softly, trying to explain herself. Every word of what she said was the truth, even if Kaneko didn't know it. "You're a liar. Leave me alone. I hate you," Kaneko yelled, running past her and into the orc building. Kuroka sighed, trying to keep calm. Issei reappeared behind her, wrapping his hand around her shoulders. "Let's go home," he said. "She'll come around. You just need to give her some time. There's no doubt in my mind that Serafel is going to tell her what really happened, so she'll forgive you soon enough." Kuroka was lying face down on their bed, under a blanket, crying into a pillow. She was strong, maybe the strongest person Issei knew, but everyone had their weaknesses, and Kaneko was hers. To be so utterly rejected. It hurt. It hurt bad. Issei was sitting up beside her, rubbing the poor girl's back and trying to provide comfort. "It'll work out, I feel it. We just gotta give it some time, that's all." Kuroka didn't say much, but the crying reduced to sniffling. Sighing and idly thinking about how cute she was like this, Issei slid under the blanket with her and wrapped her in a warm hug. As aloof as she could be sometimes, Kuroka was a cuddlebug and loved to be touching Issei, no matter the situation. So, naturally, she was grateful when he embraced her. "Yeah, I know," she mumbled into his shoulder. "But it hurt." "I know. Believe me, I know. Family is like that. We'd die for them, but they hurt us the most, sometimes." It's all we can do to be the best we can be for them whenever they need it and hope it'll all turn out okay. But, as for you, you're free. How's it feel?" Sniffling one last time, Kuroka smiled. "It feels great. A weight's been lifted off my shoulders, Naya. I feel like I don't need to constantly watch over my shoulder anymore. I'm glad. You'll never have to again, as long as I've got Issei. But, seriously, you're free. If you don't want to, you don't have to be in my peerage." Issei was silenced as Kuroka told him to shut up in the best way possible, with a soft kiss on the lips. Pulling back, he smiled. "So, do you still want to be my queen?" Kuroka smiled back, part mischievous and part loving. "Hell yeah." Issei awoke atop a field of lush green grass, extending outwards as far as the eye could see in every direction. Gorgeous white clouds were sparse in the sky, and running water could be faintly heard from somewhere. A faint smell of honey hung thinly in the air. As Issei looked around in this direction and that, he began to wonder. Where was he? How had he gotten here? But then, he realized, he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was a figure dressed in a pristine white dress and veil, facing away from him. He vaguely recognized the person's shape, but not enough to place who they were. "Hello? Where am I?" Issei nearly jumped at how deep his voice was, before realizing he wasn't in human form. He was in all his draconian glory, without a trace of human left on him. For some reason, his body felt almost numb, and he hadn't even noticed that he wasn't in the same form he'd gone to sleep in. "Not really anywhere you'd recognize, I don't think." The figure spoke quietly, but with a humorous edge to her voice. Issei could have sworn he knew who it was, but couldn't quite place it. "You won't be back here for a while, and you've certainly never been here before." He attempted to reach out with Senjutsu, but it was like everything around him was dialed to 11. Even the air was so thick with Kai that he couldn't read anything but himself. "I don't understand." Issei sat down, resting all his weight on his forelegs. He looked almost canine if you could even consider a massive red dragon in that sense. "No, but that's not really important." The figure seemed to sway back and forth in the gentle breeze, and Issei began to wonder who and what he was talking to. He didn't think any normal human would sit and have a conversation with a fire drake, so he doubted the figure was mundane. "Where we are doesn't matter. What matters is that we're here together." "Who are you?" Issei tilted his head, looking down on the figure. "I can recognize my son even as a dragon, but you don't know who I am? Shameful." The figure turned around, and Issei nearly recoiled out of shock. A middle-aged Japanese woman, with a smile in her eyes and happiness on her face. Issei's mother, Yuuka. As alive as ever. "But you. I'd, yes. One could say you did too, Or at least, the human part of you did," Yuuka said, tilting her head in question. All of a sudden, Issei felt ashamed. In some weird cacophony of emotion, he felt guilty for throwing away the body she'd given him, and embarrassed to show his ugly face in front of his still very human mother. "I've changed." Issei lowered himself to the ground, almost like a submissive dog. He found himself unable to transform back into a human, no matter how he tried, and resorted to covering his head with a wing. No, you're still the goofy boy I know who threw himself in front of a moving car to save a stray kitten. You might have scales and wings, but you're still my boy, and I'm beyond proud of what you've become." Yuuka walked forward and gently pushed the large wing out of the way, and lightly held Issei's maw. She looked up into his emerald eyes without an ounce of fear or contempt for what he turned into, and she held only pride in her gaze. "Do you know everything that's happened?" Issei asked, pulling his head out of her hands. He couldn't bear to look her in the eyes. Yuuka nodded. "I know it all. And I know you're going to become something else very shortly." "Are you angry?" Issei asked quietly, his deep voice rumbling in his chest. "Oh, no. What you did, what you're going to do. You did out of the goodness of your heart. Could you have denied the king's proposal and fought tooth and claw to keep the girl safe on your own? Yes, but you would have killed countless good people and given the girl a worse life than she had before. But you have chosen to give the girl to those who'd have killed her, or worse, let her die yourself. Yes, and you would have saved yourself a lot of trouble, but you never would have been able to live with your choice." Issei stayed quiet. He'd been debating with himself for a while now about those very same actions, and as always, his mother's moral compass was unerring. You defied the king of sin, the morning star himself, just so she could have a peaceful moment. You became a dragon and live in constant pain with your new body, just so you can defend her when the time comes. You chose to become a creature of sin yourself, to become one of those who wronged her, just so she can have the life she deserves. Once again, he said nothing. He hadn't told a soul that his new body, as fantastic as it was, hurt him very much. Especially transforming. It was agonizing. And, becoming a devil. Did Issei want to? No. Did he have a choice? Yes, absolutely. Oh, sure, he could defy the devils and wage war on them and even side with another faction. But the risk of them killing Kuroka would always be present until he'd personally killed every last one of them. It would be genocide. And he didn't think he had it in him to do that, even for Kuroka. But this way, she would be free to live the life she wanted, with no strings attached. All it meant was becoming the very thing she hated most. Even joining the fight against the Phoenix, which you didn't have to do, was out of goodness. You didn't have to agree. You know and I know, you could have denied the king's addendum and he would have kept the deal as was. But, you couldn't stomach the thought of a girl being trapped with someone she hates in an unjust union. And so again you took it upon yourself to help. Was I wrong? Tell me what I should have done. Issei wasn't being sarcastic. His mother was the wisest person he knew and he desperately wanted her counsel. He'd felt adrift on a stormy sea after she died and he was alone without her guiding voice. Now that he could hear it again, all he wanted was her assurance. You did everything absolutely right. I couldn't be happier with how things turned out. All a mother ever wants is to raise a son who always does the right thing, even at his own expense. Don't worry. Soon enough, you'll see how right you were. Thanks, Mom. In an instant, Issei was in human form. He didn't know how it happened and he didn't feel the transformation. But he didn't waste a second. He hugged his mother with everything he had and she returned it gladly. After a moment, Issei pulled away. Was this just a dream? He asked, looking her in the eyes. Oh, who could say? It's always so hard to tell. She answered, grinning. Issei felt himself wake up but didn't open his eyes. He felt something else. Tucking his memories of the pleasant dream away, he began to focus. A soft hand, lightly brushing his cheek. A silken head of hair tucked into the crook of his right shoulder. Two golden eyes, looking right at him while he slept. Unable to resist, Issei cracked a wide smile. With all the love and adoration he felt coming from Kuroka, he knew he'd made the right choices. He almost wanted to smile wider as he realized she had no idea he was awake. With the way they were positioned, his right hand was underneath her lower back. The perfect place to cause trouble. Not wasting a second, Issei ruthlessly pinched her butt. Now, his expected reaction was that she'd jump up, possibly even stumble out of bed. Issei was sure the sharp pinch would be unexpected enough to startle her, or at the very least, surprise her. But, no. Not at all. Kuroka knew Issei was awake. And in his half-asleep fumbling to find the perfect spot to pinch, she'd absolutely felt him grabbing up her ass. Not that she minded, of course, but he wasn't nearly as subtle as he thought he'd been. So, once he pinched. She didn't jump or anything like he thought she would. No, Kuroka moaned. Issei, still pretending to be asleep, blanched. He quickly retracted his arm and turned over, lying with his back to her. But that hardly stopped Kuroka. She grabbed his arm before he could pull it all the way away and moved extremely close to his ear. Oh no, you don't, dragon boy. You got away with that shit the other day, but now there's no one here to ring the doorbell and save you, Naya. You wanna tease, I'll show you what happens. Kuroka spoke softly, directly into his ear, and when she was finished speaking, she exhaled onto his neck, sending goosebumps down the boy's spine. Issei, finally getting that she knew he was awake, looked up at the mischievous catgirl's eyes and realized he wasn't getting out of this one. Her sultry grin set off something in his own body, and he physically felt his body temperature rise several degrees. All of a sudden he took on the same look from the day before, in the bathroom, when he'd pushed Kuroka against the wall. He felt the call to answer her challenge, to be the predator instead of prey. His pupils tightened, his eyes widened, and his teeth grew sharp. His voice became deeper, almost as low as in his dragon form, and his skin heated to a point of almost being painful. Oh, no Kuroka. I'll show you what happens when I tease. The most physical they'd gotten previously is a particularly heated makeout session on Issei's couch, but never before had they gone all the way. Until then. Ria stood outside, knocking on Issei's door for what had to be the 5th time in several minutes. Surziches had told Issei she'd be contacting him, so one would assume he'd be expecting a visitor, given that he hadn't thought to leave his phone number or anything of the sort. Ria's frowned. Surely he was home, right? Then, she felt something. A tiny rumble, almost undetectable, and at first she thought it was her imagination. Then, another. And another. And all of a sudden, the house was shaking violently, every other second. After less than a minute, it stopped entirely. Riaz narrowed her eyes, wondering just what was going on inside. She sent a quick text to Surziches, the king of devils had an iPhone, believe it or not, asking him to send her Issei's phone number. Less than another minute later, she was waiting for Issei to pick up the phone. It didn't take long. Yes. The depth of the voice was far beyond anything a teenage boy could produce, and so Riaz at first thought Surziches had somehow sent the wrong number. My mistake, I think I've got the wrong number. Riaz. I mean, ahem, Rias. No, this is Issei. Mid-sentence, his voice went from impossibly deep to a normal human tone, if a bit gravelly, and Rias was just a bit confused. Serafal said he had dragon features, but did that include a voice? I'm outside your front door. Are you home? What? From inside the house, Rias heard a crash, followed by the sound of loud footsteps down a wooden staircase, and finally, the tone telling her she'd been hung upon. The front door swung open, revealing Issei. Shirtless, with one draconic wing half extended from his right shoulder, jagged teeth protruding from his lower jaw, glowing green eyes, tinted red skin, and a single horn on the left side of his head. He was breathing heavily as if he'd just run a marathon in a desert. Rias nearly screamed. It looked like he'd gone through a pile of animal parts and taped random things all over himself in some dragon-human amalgamation. What's wrong? Issei asked as if nothing was. Rias gestured from his head to his toes, unable to properly form words. Issei looked down at himself and realized he was an approximately one-quarter dragon at the moment and looked back up at Rias. Just a sec. He said sheepishly and closed the door for a moment. When he opened it again several seconds later, he was entirely human. You reek. Rias said shortly, noticing the thick smell of musk coming from the boy. She noticed a thin sheen of sweat covered his body and she slowly began to put the pieces together. Yeah. Haven't showered yet. Issei said, short of breath. Oh, I'm sure. Is she gonna be okay? Rias asked, a knowing smile on her face. When she's not unconscious, I'll let you know. Issei replied, taking some pride in his ability. Dragons, it seemed, were ferocious lovers. Rias blushed just a bit. Anyway, I'm here about what's happening today. Or did you forget about your reincarnation? No, I remembered. I just didn't know it would be early in the morning. Morning? Issei, it's 2 in the afternoon. Rias said, a confused look on her face. Now it was Issei's turn to blush. Is it really? He'd apparently lost track of time. Rias pointed to the screen on her phone. 2:03. Oh. Wow. So, how's this work? Issei asked, finally catching his breath. Well, first, you go clean up. Then you'll collect Kuroka if she's alive, and whenever you're both ready, you'll come to old school building, where we were yesterday. From there, we'll teleport to the underworld and begin preparation for your reincarnation. I'd come here hoping you'd be ready now, but it seems you've been preoccupied. Right. Sorry. Just be quick. Try and be there within an hour. Sure. An hour and a half later. Rias was just about to call Issei again when a knock came on the orc door. Come in. She yelled. The door opened slowly and revealed a meek Issei with an ecstatic-looking Kuroka practically wrapped around his left arm. Both of them looked a little disheveled. Issei's hair was matted down in places, and Kuroka's kimono wasn't sitting quite right. Sorry, I'm late. Issei said, sheepish. Kuroka revealed why she was so close to him pretty quickly, as soon as they took their first steps into the room, that is. She was walking with a limp. Surziches and Serafo laughed out loud. Grafia looked annoyed, and Akeno giggled. Rias sighed and put her head in her hands. Collecting himself, Surziches gestured to the empty couch across from where he and Serafo were seated. Grafia stood behind him, and Rias was obviously at her desk. Issei and Kuroka took their seats on the couch, and while Issei sat up straight, Kuroka sort of just melted into his side. Rough morning? Surziches asked, smiling. Before Issei could even answer, Kuroka laughed. So what's the plan? Issei asked, ready to move away from the uncomfortable subject. Soon, we'll depart for the underworld and make ready your reincarnation as Issei Haidu Bune and take you to the Bune territory. You'll likely require at least a day's rest after being reincarnated, so we'll simply drop you and Kuroka at your new mansion and collect you later. Surziches explained. Mansion? Issei asked, not really expecting that. Oh, of course. Once you signed that contract, you became, let's just say, very wealthy. A mansion is hardly all of your new property. Issei gawked at the man for a moment but swiftly shook his head, clearing his mind. He had real questions and he needed to ask them before he did anything. I have a couple of questions. Go ahead. Surziches nodded. This reincarnation. Will I remain a dragon? Entirely, yes. The only thing that will change is your ability to use magic. Currently limited only to dragon-specific magic, you will also be able to use devil magic. In addition, you will gain the powers of the Bune family, but we'll go over that later. The biggest change is that you'll become a devil in name and faction. You can never hold the title of Dragon King, or any other title, for that matter. Does that bother you? Surziches tilted his head in question. He hadn't expected to be one who cared about titles, but you never know for sure. Not really. Should it? Issei directed the question at his left arm, which briefly glowed crimson and emerald before quickly calming down. No, that doesn't bother me. Great. There's one other thing I should mention. I've arranged for a visit from another of your kind, a dragon turned devil. He was previously a dragon king, known as Tannen, before joining the devils in exchange for resources. Alright. Next question, then. I'm all ears. Will I, and by extension, Kuroka, be under anyone's control? I'm not to be made a slave, under any circumstances. Issei growled and his eyes became vicious, but Surzich's was unfazed. The Devil King knew how highly dragons treasured freedom. No. You'll answer to the Devil Council and the 4 Devil Kings in much the same way you'd answer to the government here, but you'll be under no one's control but your own. Being a young high-class devil, you're about as far from a slave as our society can get. Issei inwardly sighed in relief. As much as he wanted to free Kuroka, he didn't want to lose his own freedom in the process. He was happy that wasn't the case. Last question. Being a full member of the Devil faction, will I be entitled to the same protection and benefits befitting a natural-born member, right? Indeed. Your battles will become ours, and so on. You'll be entirely one of us, and under the protection of myself and every other allied devil. Issei was glad of that. The Red Dragon Emperor was bound to have enemies, from what he'd heard, and having the support of an entire faction was sure to help at some point. That's all from me, I guess. I'm ready whenever. Then we'll depart immediately. Everyone in the room stood up, and a bright red magic circle appeared beneath their feet. Within seconds, they were gone. Red dragons. Recognized historically for their ferocity and greed, none was ever quite so ferocious nor greedy as Drake Gotch, the Welsh dragon. Known as the Heavenly Dragon of Domination and the Red Dragon Emperor, tales of this particular tyrant are essentially the bones of Western dragon mythos. He slept on a hoard of stolen gold, killed whenever and whomever he wished and guarded his land and treasure with unmatched might. With flames that burned forever and power that could destroy even the strongest of humanity's warriors with ease. Drake of Wales was truly a force unparalleled. Then came Albion. The venomous white dragon from the Far East, wise beyond measure and eager to test himself against the fabled Red One. Albion was revered as a god in his home country of China and, like Drake, had never known a true challenge. When the two met, it was catastrophic. The world itself shuddered at their clash. The ground split, the sky screamed, and those unlucky enough to be near their battle were slaughtered without thought. For 40 days and 40 nights the duel raged on, the two evenly matched and relishing in their rite of blood. They would have fought to the death, if not for one fatal mistake. In their blind fighting, they stumbled into the midst of another war. Between the 3 factions of the Bible. Enraged at having been interrupted, the twin heavenly dragons began a merciless genocide, murdering any who stood in their way. In the end, it was only through the combined efforts of all 3 factions, culminating in the death of the biblical god himself, that the 2 dragons were able to be sealed away, locked within objects of power. Sacred gears. The red gauntlet of the Welsh dragon and the white wings of Albion. The boosted gear and the divine dividing. Captured forever within their prisons of power, the dragons vowed to fight forever, sealing the fate of all who bore their might. Issei didn't really know what to expect when Surzich's had said he'd be going to the underworld. He certainly hadn't expected lush gardens and an ornate palace. Issei and company stood amidst a type of teleportation landing zone. Think helipad, but for teleportation. In front of them was an expertly trimmed and maintained bush garden, with pristine water fountains casting up neat visages of plants and an excellent display of hydro-engineering. Far overhead was a purple sky filled with white clouds, but with no discernible light source to be seen. But the real marvel was just ahead, past the garden. A palace, with steep silver walls and magic sigils of all shapes and sizes written up and down them. Banners with what Issei could only assume was the devil's royal crest or something similar hung from the top, cascading almost down to the ground. This is insane. Issei said breathlessly, taking in the sights. Dragon or not, he was still just a kid from a small Japanese town. He was more than a bit culture shocked. Kuroka, still firmly wrapped around his arm, hummed in faint disagreement. She had no good memories of this place. She looked around uneasily, half expecting to be ambushed by royal guards. This is Lilith, the capital city of the Devil territory and the seat of power in the underworld. This is where we'll be conducting your ceremony. Surzich's explained, walking forward. The group closely followed him. What exactly is going to happen during this ceremony? Issei asked, feeling just a little nervous. Nothing to worry about. We'll go over all of that once we're inside, not to worry. Surzich's led them up to the gilded wooden doors of the palace, which opened on their own once he drew close. Inside was a dimly lit hallway, with a red carpet on the ground, not unlike what one would see at a Hollywood premiere, flanked by red ropes meant to keep back some crowd. This is generally a very public affair, with most of the underworld's rich and famous attending the coronation. Yours is a secret one, with your true first appearance to be held after the rating game. I'm sure that doesn't bother you any. Issei hummed in agreement, not really caring for big crowds. He'd be fine without making any public appearance at all. Just this way. Surziches led them further down the hall, coming to a huge set of stone doors with large ceremonial handles. Once again, they opened for him on their own, revealing the ritual chamber beyond. Issei nearly choked. The massive stone chamber was built almost entirely of black marble, with an imposing jet altar at the epicenter of the room and well over 50 pillars surrounding the walls. The group fanned out into the large room, Rias and Akeno standing off to one side, while Issei, Kuroka, and the two devil kings stood near the altar. "Stand in front of that altar, if you would," Surziches said, gesturing to one side of the black altar, while he himself moved to the opposite side. Grafia, whom Issei had actually forgotten was present, approached Surziches and handed him a chess piece, a king from the looks of it. "Do you know what this is?" Surziches asked, holding up the trinket. Issei shrugged. Kuroka had mentioned evil pieces before, but not enough for him to know what he was talking about. An evil piece? Correct, but not any ordinary one. This is based on very new technology and very old magic. This is what's called a king piece. It'll turn you into a devil and bestow upon you the powers of the Bune Pillar. It was made from the magic essence of the last living Bune member himself, who expressed his wishes for his house to continue while lying on his deathbed. It's exceedingly valuable and the only one of its kind. Here. Surziches handed the piece to Issei, who turned the odd thing over and over in his hands. It was a dark red color and the head of the piece was that of a dragon. It seemed to breathe in his hands and he felt an odd affinity with the thing like it was a part of him. "Alright. Now, hold that in your left hand with your fist closed and touch this with your right hand." Surziches held out his hand palm up and in it, a floating black orb appeared. Issei reached out and placed his hand flat against the slightly warm orb and felt a jolt shoot throughout his entire body. The piece he was holding in his left hand disappeared into his palm and he pulled back his right hand, recoiling from the shock. Where his hand had been, there was a perfect glowing red handprint. The orb hummed and disappeared, its purpose achieved. "And you're done. You're going to pass out very shortly, so while you're still conscious, here's these," Surziches said, handing Issei a freshly summoned box. The box was made of lacquered cherry wood with gilded accents and seemed to have several things rattling around inside of it. Issei handed it off to Kuroka, not really caring what was inside it. She took the thing and quickly put it inside a pocket dimension, drawing a glare from Grafia. That was it?" Issei asked, feeling his body. "I don't feel any different." He'd expected more of a spectacle. Surziches chuckled. "You have to give it time to work. When you wake up, you'll feel much different. I don't feel like I'm going to pass out." Before Issei could even finish his sentence, his world went black. Surziches smiled and Serafol giggled. Nobody ever felt like they were going to black out. It just happened. Kuroka was quick to catch Issei before he could fall. She'd experienced much the same thing when she was reincarnated, though hers hadn't been nearly as easy. "You're ready to go, I assume?" The Lucifer devil asked the Nekoshou, who just nodded. Once Issei passed out, she was left alone with people who, not a week ago, would have killed her on sight. It wasn't the best feeling in the world. "Then we'll be off. We'll return shortly, everyone." Surziches and Serafol stood next to Kuroka, while Rias, Akeno, and Grafia remained where they were. Beneath Kuroka and the Devil King. A day later. Issei opened his eyes and immediately had to close them again. It was blindingly bright and he nearly screamed from the searing pain. "Yeah, I did that same thing." He heard Kuroka's voice to his side and was reassured. Willing his pupils to tighten as far as they could, he opened his eyes once more. He saw his favorite person on earth, lying face down beside him on a silken maroon sheet. Head resting on her hands, she gazed into his eyes in some combination of playfulness and worry. "Your eyes aren't so good with bright light anymore." "What happened?" Issei asked, sitting up and rubbing his face. He felt groggy, like he'd simultaneously slept too much and not enough. "You slipped in the shower and knocked yourself out," Kuroka replied, with a completely straight face. Issei stared at her blankly for a few seconds, then erupted into uproarious laughter. He grabbed Kuroka around the waist and pulled into her a spooning position, with the exception that they were facing each other instead of facing in one direction. She giggled playfully and the two of them just rolled around for a minute on the bed, not really doing anything except laughing and cuddling. "Hey, whose bed is this?" Issei asked, slowly realizing where he was. They were on a very large bed, against a wall in an unfamiliar room. He was shirtless and wearing only sweatpants, which he guessed probably wasn't the devil's fault. Kuroka was wearing a black silk robe, tied loosely in such a way that only her most important bit stayed hidden. "Ours. Let's break it in." Kuroka purred into Issei's shoulder, which almost made him pounce her right there, but he began to think just a little bit more about the situation. "Is this our new house? In the Bune territory?" Issei asked, trying his hardest to keep from getting aroused by his overly affectionate partner. Kuroka was a very physical lover and loved to be in contact with Issei every second she could. Surziches dropped us here after you face planted on the altar. Kuroka said, cackling at the thought of Issei hitting his head on the ceremonial altar. That hadn't actually happened, of course, but how funny would it have been if it did? Issei, in an amazing display of self-control, unwrapped himself from Kuroka and stood up from the bed. She huffed in disappointment but stood up beside him. Oh, right. You still have that box Surziches gave me? Issei asked, turning towards her. Kuroka wordlessly pulled the box out of her pocket dimension and handed it to him. Issei felt the weight of the box in his hand and shifted it this way and that. He seemed to be collecting his thoughts, trying to say something, but unable to find the words. I don't really know how to say this, so I'm just gonna say it. I don't want you in my peerage. Issei looked her in the eyes. Kuroka tilted her head, and the smile left her face. What? Don't take that wrong, I want you to be free. Completely. With no master, not even me. Issei said, shaking his head. Kuroka looked him in the eyes for a second, then burst into laughter. Nyahahaha. You're nothing if not predictable, darling. Issei looked confused. What? Why don't you open that box, Naya? Following her odd instructions, Issei opened the lid on the opulent box. Inside was the standard set of 16 pieces, in the same style as the king piece he'd used. Except, 2 were missing. The king, obviously, but also the queen. Issei looked up at Kuroka with shock in his eyes. She stared back with a smug grin, and after a moment he couldn't help but grin too. She held up 2 dull-looking bishop pieces, showing that she'd already used the piece and replaced her old ones. You knew I'd say that, so you already used the piece. Sly cat. Issei remarked, mildly impressed. I already told you I'd be your queen, Issei. No taking that back. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me, Naya. Kuroka said, flinging the bishop pieces across the room and taking his hands in hers. On the back of her right hand appeared a magic circle, with a devilishly stylized bee at the center, an interlocked weave of hexagons and circles and all other manners of intricate polygons. It glowed with soft maroon light, the color of the Bune family. Is that our new crest? Issei asked, mesmerized. He felt like he'd known the pattern his whole life. Something in the dragon part of him felt hypnotized by it, and he almost couldn't look away. Kuroka Bune, queen of the Bune house, reporting for duty. She said, wrapping her arms around his neck. What would you have me do, my king? Issei reciprocated, wrapping his arms around her waist. Stay with me, forever. A light blush graced his face. As if I'd go anywhere else. Kuroka replied matter-of-factly, looking up into his emerald eyes with her golden ones. If I wake up and this was all a dream, I'll be pissed. Issei said quietly, nuzzling his nose against hers. Kuroka hummed in agreement. After a moment Issei pulled away, a thought connecting in his mind. So, the 2 bishop pieces from when you became a devil. They came out of my chest as soon as I put the queen piece in, Naya. The worst part of me, gone, just like that. Replaced by you. Kuroka said lovingly, smiling brighter than Issei had ever seen. That's fantastic. So we've only got a couple of loose ends left, huh? Yeah. Hineko. Yeah. I'll talk to her when I go to the raiding game. I promise you're gonna be a family again. Issei declared, determined to make good on his original promise to Kuroka. Maybe it's not for me, you know. Kuroka said, sitting down on the side of the bed. What do you mean? Issei sat next to her hands clasped between his, trying to provide any kind of comfort he could. Well, what she said. When I tried to talk to her. It was justified, and I'd do it again, but she's right. I killed her dad. Maybe I don't deserve a family. Kuroka said, spilling her feelings. Truth be told, Kuroka was one of the most secretive and closed-off people on the planet when it came to what she was really feeling. But, ever since the time he essentially tore her mind open with Senjutsu, she tried to be as open as possible with him. It was still hard to completely open up to someone, but Issei made it easy. Bullshit. Regardless of whether you deserve it or not, which you do, Kuroka. You and I. We're a family, now. You're my queen. You said it yourself, that's not gonna change. Regardless of whether or not Kaneko forgives you, which she will, don't you dare say you don't have or don't deserve a family. I'm with you till the end of the line, and she will be too. Kuroka looked up at him, eyes wide. All of a sudden, she blushed and turned away, which frightened Issei. It was very uncharacteristic. Oh, no. You said something really cool. I might be in love. Kuroka hid her face, acting like a bashful maiden. I hope so. I know I am. Issei said quietly, blowing cold air on her neck and making her yelp. Let's take a look around the place. He suggested, standing up and holding his hand out for Kuroka to take and follow him. She did and stood up from her place on the bed. The room they were in was a big one, with a bed facing a large window, letting daylight pour in, which is what had fried Issei's eyes, and a maroon and black motif running throughout all the decor. New furniture was scattered here and there, but for the most part, it was completely empty, save a dresser that had all of Issei's clothes, and things moved in already. How the devils had accomplished that with himself and Kuroka in the room for the past 24 hours he'd never understand. Issei, wanting to try something new, combined his skills in shapeshifting and senjutsu. He pulled ambient energy from the environment into himself and used it to create clothes. A red shirt formed over his chest and jeans took the place of his sweatpants. Impressive. Kuroka remarked, doing the same thing and creating her usual attire. They left the bedroom, walking out into a hallway, only to be greeted by a woman in a proper maroon and black maid uniform. She had green hair tied back in a tight bun and wore bifocal glasses. Issei and Kuroka were both a little stunned. Neither of them had sensed anyone on the other side of the door, in no small part due to the fact that they hadn't expected anyone to be in their house. Good morning, Lord Issei and Lady Kuroka. My name is Julie, and I am the head maid of your new estate, appointed by Lord Lucifer himself. It's a pleasure to meet you both. Julie dropped into a bow. Nice to meet you too. Issei replied, a bit flabbergasted. Just how rich was he to have a maid who was apparently the head maid, meaning there were at least a few more and not even know about any of them. Indeed. If you'll follow me, I'll introduce you to the rest of your staff. The rest? Issei asked, mildly shocked. Yes. This way. Julie began to walk down the hallway, prompting Issei and Kuroka to hurry after her. The house was massive. Ornate decorations and intricate maroon-black motifs ran throughout the length of their halls. The master bedroom, the one Issei and Kuroka had left, was down a hall on the third floor. A large staircase opened up at the center of the hall and fed down into the second and third floors, each story bigger than the one above. This is insane. Issei mumbled under his breath. Kuroka was quick to agree. I'm told you were originally a human, raised in the human world. I can imagine this is all a shock to you, but I and the rest of your staff will do our utmost to ensure that you do not ever feel uncomfortable. Julie said, trying to assuage Issei's worries. Thanks. Issei didn't really know how to respond. He felt like a fish out of water. Kuroka had seen much of the house on her way into it, but she hadn't seen anything like a maid force. She was just as surprised as he was. You're welcome. Just here. Julie led them down the extravagant steps, where a contingent of butlers and maids and guards were gathered on a checkered floor in front of a large, imposing set of brass doors. Julie led them in front of the staff, who were all standing at attention. This is your humble staff, Millard. I am the head maid, in charge of everyone present and just under you and yours in the household hierarchy. If you require anything at all, please let one of us know. I'll arrange a briefing on your household responsibilities and perks later, but for now I sense you need some air. Please take all the time you need. Everything will be running smoothly, rest assured. Julie bowed, and the rest of the staff followed suit. Issei was left blown away by all the people. Thank you. Please. Do your best. Issei said, trying to come up with something coherent. You heard him. Let's go. Julie said with authority. All the maids and butlers followed her as she left the room, retreating into a door under the right side of the stairs, while the guards took up positions around the house. Some of them filed outside, some upstairs, and some stood right by the doors. Issei facepalmed. This is going to get old, I can see it now. He muttered, already lamenting his house in Kuo. He could go back to it whenever, but he'd have to learn to teleport first. Well, I think it'll have its perks. Wonder if I could get one of those maid uniforms, Naya. Kuroka said, a mischievous glint in her eye. I don't think. Stay here. Issei pushed Kuroka backwards and ran towards the doors. His skin began to shift and contort, and as he flew through the doors flanked by two guards, he shifted into his dragon form. As soon as he left the door, Issei used the ground as a launch pad and shot high into the air, searching all around him. He didn't really know what it was, but something primal in his body told him there was a threat. He felt an irresistible urge to defend his territory, but he couldn't see from what. He flew around in a wide circle above his estate, searching far and wide for the unseen foe. Where are you? Issei called out, roaring. His dragon instincts told him there was an imminent threat, but he didn't know what. His answer came in the form of a fireball. Issei had just enough time to look up before the massive blaze slammed into him from above, sending him spiraling down to the ground. He roared out, not in pain but at defiance, and shot back into the air. Far above him, hidden in the clouds, was another dragon. He felt the call of his red dragon blood screaming at him to defend his territory and his mate, everything else is damned. He soared up into the sky, aiming to rip the throat out of this invader for daring to challenge his authority. Ha! You truly are the inheritor of Drake. But you're 1,000 years too young to take me on. The dragon shouted down at him. The invader was cloaked in the clouds and the harsh light of the morning sky, but Issei could see it clearly. A purple semi-humanoid dragon, with golden horns stretching forward and plate armor over his waist and shoulders. Issei roared viciously in response. He was furious and resolved to teach the invader a lesson by goring him with his own horns. The invading dragon shot downwards towards Issei, a plume of fire building behind him. He was moving far faster than the newly reborn Drake, however, and Issei could not move out of the way fast enough. The dragon swept to the side, flinging the fireball into Issei's face before he could react. Now, red dragons have been associated with fire for a very long time, and with good reason. They are the progenitors of the flame, and it runs in their very blood. The fireball did not hurt Issei's flesh, but it wounded his pride. He roared again, angered beyond measure, as he flew back up towards the dragon. Renthist, Darastrix. The dragon spoke in a language Issei did not understand, but was somehow very familiar. Kuroka had told him devils instinctively understood all languages, but whatever the other dragon was speaking was an exception. Yet, though he could not comprehend it, he felt the meaning nonetheless. The invader was urging him to speak as a dragon instead of a man, in a language older than time. The language of the dragons themselves. Answer him, Drake. You know the words. Drake mentally urged Issei, his own red dragon blood boiling from the battle, though he himself knew the invading dragon well. Verlum. Issei roared back, feeling the ancient language swimming in his subconscious. He called the invader just that. An invader. Ha. Good, Drake. I am Tannen. Tannen was just in front of him now, and apparently no longer attacking. But Issei was seeing red, and could not be calmed by a mere introduction. Now within the perfect range, he reached out with his mind and slammed into Tannen's, funneling all the rage he had into a psychic attack, while he physically raced towards the stunned worm. Tannen was not prepared and felt his minuscule psychic defenses shatter under the power of Issei's brutal senjutsu. It left him unable to move for just a few short moments, but that was enough. Issei roared and exhaled pure inferno, screaming a raging blaze into Tannen's face, while swiping a gouge into the older dragon's chest with massive claws. Tannen himself bellowed out in pain, grabbing Issei by the neck and right wing and flinging him downwards. Ha! It seems you've lost your edge, Tannen. For a Drake to wound you so easily. Drake, immeasurably proud of his protege, roared in laughter. Issei, his pride restored and anger diminished, flapped his wings and hung in the air under the bleeding and burned Tannen. The meteor blazed dragon, as he was known, wounded so thoroughly by what was truly a young Drake. Tannen laughed, holding his chest as purple blood dripped down a three-clawed gash. It would seem so. Not for many long years has the world seen a red Drake so fierce. Come, young one. I would speak to you. Tannen said, moving towards the ground. Issei followed him, tucking his gargantuan wings in and diving straight down. Just before making contact, he flared out, stopping himself not 10 feet from the ground, slowly gliding the rest of the way. Once on the ground, Issei shifted back into a human form, Kuroka running to greet him. She would have ragged on him for throwing her away and rushing out to fight by himself, but that thought was quashed the moment she caught sight of Tannen. He was easily twice dragon Issei's size, and she'd heard the stories of how potent his flames were. She hadn't been able to see their fight, being too far in the clouds, but she'd heard the mighty explosions of his famed meteor magic and almost instantly recognized who it was. But, regardless of any of that, she was more than a little pissed at him for throwing her aside and running out to fight a dragon without her. Are you okay? Kuroka asked, resolving to discuss his reckless actions later. Yeah. I think I won, all things considered. He's the only one bleeding. Issei replied, smiling a toothy grin down at her. Oh my god. I think I just realized something really important. Kuroka said, a grim look on her face. She held her forehead, acting like she'd really come up with something major. Issei got a bit worried. What is it? That you're an idiot, dragon boy. Attacking Tannen, the dragon king. Are you stupid? She had resolved to talk about it later, but now's as good as ever. Issei fell on his face, dragged down by the sheer weight of her ruthless insult. You're both very lively. Tannen said, landing just in front of the two of them. He shrank down to just a bit bigger than a normal human, wishing to converse more normally. I am Tannen, Meteor Blaze Dragon and former Dragon King. I was asked to come here to instruct the Scion of Drake, but I was not expecting to meet another of my own tribe. You have my respect for wounding me, young Drake. Tannen did a half-bow, truly respecting Issei for managing to land such a savage attack on him, a much older and stronger Dragon King. Thanks. Nothing woke up a red dragon like a fierce battle, and Issei's pulse was pounding. All the timidity he'd felt before when addressing his staff was gone, replaced only by draconic confidence. However, it's possible you may have made a mistake. Tannen said, a slightly humorous edge to his voice. How? I thought I fought pretty well. Issei said, not one to be humble. Your land borders the familiar forest, home to another dragon king, far stronger than I. She and your partner have ill blood between them, and she will have sensed your power. Be wary. Yikes. Issei said, not eager at the prospect of fighting an even stronger dragon. He was proud of himself for landing the hit, but he knew that if he attempted to truly fight Tannen, much less a stronger dragon, he would lose. Oh no. He's right. I completely forgot. Drake wailed in Issei's mind, reminded of his past transgressions. Who is this dragon king? Tiamat, mother of dragons. I suspect she will make an appearance soon enough. But that is hardly the reason for my being here. You are to make an appearance in the raiding game of the Grimoire and Phoenix, yes? That's right. It's supposed to be my big debut as a high-class devil. Issei said, repeating what Surziches had told him. Indeed. Your opponents will be inconsequential at your current strength, but it's not their power that matters. It is your manner of dispatching them. In a normal game, you would be expected to hold back and let the Grimoire girl display her skills, but not this time. You will fight Riser Phoenix yourself and make your first appearance as the heir of Bune. I am here to teach you how to truly harm the immortal bird. Wait, the Phoenix guy is actually a phoenix. In the same sense that you are a dragon. Not entirely, but more than enough to matter. He is immortal to everything except strong holy objects, but you too are vulnerable to those. But you possess something even better than that. Do I? Issei asked, not knowing what could be better for dispatching a devil than holy relics. He'd actually had to cover up the one crucifix in his house because it burned Kuroka's eyes just from looking at it. Indeed. I tasted the bite of your flames. They are potent, but they are capable of so much more. You are the scion of Drake, the wielder of the most powerful fire to ever scar the earth. I will teach you to use that power so that when you face the Phoenix, you will show him our kind is to be feared. Issei smirked. The thought of burning some cocky dickhead to ashes made his heart race. Sounds good to me. I'll be in your care, King Tannen. Indeed. Are you familiar with your land? Tannen asked, looking off in the distance. Not really. Issei answered, following his gaze. Off in that direction, there was a mountain range just visible against a bright morning horizon. He indeed wasn't familiar with it, not at all, but red dragons have an instinctual knowledge of everything in their position, and Issei could tell he owned it, even if he actually had no idea. That is Scaleheart Peak, where devils and dragons have gone to train for centuries. That is where we will conduct your training. I will give you the rest of today to do what you will, but tomorrow, we will begin in earnest. Tannen said, his voice rumbling the ground. I will leave you for now. If you have need of me, I will be in those mountains. Tannen left without another word, flying off towards the Scaleheart range. That left Issei and Kuroka alone, standing several meters away from the entrance to their house. That was pretty crazy. Issei commented, thinking back on what had just transpired. Oh, really? What part, that you pushed me over to run out here and fight a dragon king, or that you pushed me over to run out here and fight a dragon king? Kuroka yelled, extremely miffed. Issei rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, 100% aware that it might not have been the best idea. Sorry. Issei said quietly, grinning awkwardly. Sorry doesn't cut it, Naya. I want 12 kittens as repentance. D12. Issei nearly choked. Then, a thought crossed his mind. Hey, so. About our children. 12 of them, yes. Kuroka said, her tail swishing around in both annoyances at him and eagerness at the thought of children. Right, 12. So. He knew what he wanted to ask, but he wasn't sure about how to do it. Okay, so. Walk through this with me. Go on. You're definitely a mammal, right? Obviously. Right. And I used to be a mammal. But now. Aren't I a reptile, technically? I suppose, Naya. Where are you going with this? Well. Mammals live young, but reptiles lay eggs. So, are you gonna? If you're about to ask me if I'm gonna lay a bunch of eggs, I'm gonna tear your balls off. Right. Sorry. In his prime, Drake's fire was unparalleled. It would never stop burning until the victim was ash, no matter what. You possess within you the same fire, though you know not how to use it. Tannen was sitting cross-legged on a high rock, looking down at Dragon Issei. The two of them were at the summit of Scaleheart Peak, which was currently experiencing a snowstorm. Of course, the snow evaporated long before it ever touched Issei's hide, and though Tannen's scales were far cooler, being a purple dragon, the frost was hardly a hindrance to the meteor blaze dragon either. Issei was crouched down, his two hind legs flat, while his two front were straightened out and supporting his full weight. He impatiently waited for Tannen to get to the point, not one for drawn-out lessons. For you to discover the fire within yourself, you must meditate on what it truly means to burn. Drake achieved the might of his flames through massacre and violence. You will do it peacefully. That would be your power. Your tranquility will become your strength. What strength is there to be found in tranquility? Should I not use Drake's power to the fullest? Issei asked, confused. Drake was hated and feared by all. You will match his achievements, but you will not follow his footsteps. Drake. Issei telepathically asked for confirmation from his partner. Tannen speaks the truth. Do as he instructs, Drake. The worm spoke into Issei's mind, a remorseful edge to his voice. After being sealed, Drake had very many years to reflect on his actions, and he understood that his slaughter was nothing short of abhorrent. He did not wish Issei to turn out the same. Alright. Issei was a bit unsure. He was fine with meditating, and he was more than fine with not committing a massacre to gain power, Red Dragon or not. That said, to him, it seemed like a weird way to boost his flame's power. Do you know the dragon's word for fire? Try as he might, Issei could not come up with a word. In the heat of the battle the day prior, he had been able to come up with only a single word, and even that he really hadn't understood. No. There is but one. Issei. It describes the fire as a primordial concept, the likes of which you have no words for. It is the inferno, the destruction of the blaze. It is the light and heat, the creation of the flames. There are 1,000 words in 1,000 languages, all describing the same thing. Issei. Say it. Issei. Issei felt something in him tingle, just a bit. He wasn't quite sure how or what, but something felt odd when he said the strange word. Now, say it again, and feel it. Feel the fire, feel the inferno. The power of the flame is within you. Tannen accentuated his words with fire, exhaling flames from his nostrils. Issei reached out with Senjutsu. There was nothing to pull Kai away from on the dreary peak, so he pulled from himself. His own energy, flowing in and out through him in a recursive loop. Dragons, Kuroka had taught him, had 7 chakras, just like humans. His Kai flowed freely through all of them, sharpening his mind and senses. Issei. As Issei said the word, he felt something shift inside again. The snow around him turned to steam, and drops of liquid fire fell to the ground from the edges of his maw. He envisioned the lone tree, ablaze under a starless night sky. See it in your mind's eye. Not a force of suffering or pain, but a primordial power of creation. Fire lights our universe, and staves off entropy. It is not merely a tool for destruction, and it is not just life. It is change given form. Say it again. Issei. Issei saw stars exploding and reforming, in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. He saw the beginning of the universe, spurred on by fire beyond comprehension. Issei felt something welling up within him, like he wanted to shout, but couldn't find the words. He began to fidget uncomfortably. Now see it for what your partner made it. See it as the ultimate force of death, the sundering of life and the incineration of all. Absolute power at its most primal state. Issei. In an instant, Issei saw through Drake's eyes. He saw countless thousands of people, some wicked and some innocent, rent to less than ashes by the Red Dragon Emperor's flames. He felt horror and disgust, but the call to power was there nonetheless. He understood that with this strength came a grave responsibility to never allow the primeval flames of the Welsh dragon to scorch the earth ever again. He felt the odd feeling moving up even further inside him, and he almost began to gag. It seemed like something had worked into the back of his throat. Fire is a fickle master. It will create, but it will burn. See it now, as it truly is. 2 sides of the same beautiful coin, the most tangible of all visible mysteries. You have the power, as do all of our kind. But power is inert without action and choice. When you breathe fire, you must be the one to decide. What will you burn? What will you spare? Issei. Tannen yelled out the word and expelled a streaming fire into the air in such magnitude that all the snow in a 100-meter sphere around them was instantly evaporated. The red fire punched a hole into the clouds, letting the underworld's artificial sunlight shine down on top of them. Issei could contain it no more. He felt the meaning of the word resonating deep within his soul, within his very being. He saw fire as it truly was. Issei. Tannen's fire was impressive. Issei's fire was unimaginable. The entire several thousand square meter peak of the mountain was wreathed in a storm of swirling flames, entirely destroying the snowstorm and leaving the only fire. Tannen's fire had been red, a fair temperature for the demonstration. Issei's was orange-white, hot enough to scar and singe the very mountain they stood on. Wonderful. Such strength, such vitality. Tannen was reveling in the heat of the flames, almost joyous in his exclamation. But, Drake. Issei looked at Tannen through the inferno, which was showing no sign of slowing down. The purple dragon looked back, a grin on his scaly maroon face. You still have much to learn. Tannen was Dragon King, before becoming a devil. One of only 5 worthy enough to carry that title. He was also the tilted blaze meteor dragon, because his fire was like that of a meteor impacting the earth itself. And impact the earth it did. Issei thought his fire was incredible. But, Tannen's second fireball. He'd never seen something so powerful before. The ensuing inferno was something from legend. It covered the entire top part of the mountain, touching both the real summit and two full summits. It was a pure white flame, dwarfing Issei's in both temperature and magnitude, and also completely obliterating his previously created blaze. He almost felt embarrassed as the fireball encompassed him on all sides. Kuroka, watching from outside their house, was mildly worried. It looked like a nuke had exploded on top of Scaleheart Peak, far off in the distance where Issei was supposed to be training. After a moment, the flames dispersed into harmless motes of light. Issei was some mix between awestruck and embarrassed, the human part of him amazed by the display, and the dragon part was pissed that it wasn't his. Tannen left his perch above Issei, jumping down till he was right in front of the drake. Clapping him on the neck, right above the flanks of his shoulders, Tannen laughed. After these several days, once I'm done with you, your fire will scorch the phoenix and anyone or anything else that dare stand in the way of the Red Dragon Emperor. Tannen was smiling a crooked toothy grin, and Issei couldn't help but grin back. Several hours later. You blew up the mountain. I prefer to think of it as an explosive remodel. We've had a mountain for all of 2 days, and you already blew the top off of it. To be fair, most of it was Tannen's fault. I don't even think you guys were training, I think you were just having fun blowing shit up. Issei choked. Kuroka hit the nail on the head. Tannen and he, both being naturally impatient, had grown tired of the training and eventually just kept comparing explosions. They got to the point where they'd accidentally went at the same time and it blew the summit off the mountain entirely. One of the fall summits was now the mountain's new peak thanks to the two of them. The massive blast had been easily visible from the house and Kuroka had been dumbfounded to see that once the blast cleared the mountain was significantly shorter. Did you at least learn something? Kuroka sighed, sighing good-naturedly. After his training was over, she and Issei had somehow ended up on the roof of their new house, looking out over the artificial sunset with their legs idly hanging over the edge. Oh, of course. My fire is way better than it was before, I think. Issei said, scratching his cheek. He didn't really have much to compare his newfound flames to, as he'd never gone all out before the training session, but he assumed they were far more powerful. That's good. The light gust of wind blew through, ruffling the pair's hair and clothes. Remember when I had to help you use the restroom? Issei asked suddenly, laughing out loud at the memory. What? Kuroka blushed and stuttered, something Issei had only seen a handful of times, but really couldn't get enough of. It hadn't been in good taste to remind her of the embarrassing memory, but it sure was funny. Kidding. You're gonna need help using the restroom if you keep that up. Kuroka's ears flattened as she mumbled under her breath, mad he'd gotten to her again. It had been happening more than ever lately, and she wasn't sure she liked being on the receiving end of the teasing so much. Another comfortable silence ensued, neither of them really having anything much to say, but enjoying being together anyway. Issei was the first to break it, coming up with an odd thought. Do you ever wonder why we're here? He asked, an introspective look on his face. Kuroka was taken aback. She didn't really think he'd be the type to ask something like that. To enjoy the time we have with people we care about. And normally, she wouldn't be the type to give a straight answer, but she would tell him anything. Probably. Issei pursed his lips and furrowed his eyebrows. He realized his mistake. That wording had been kind of ambiguous. Well, that's a fantastic answer, and I love you for it, but I meant why we're on the roof. Kuroka looked to her left with a completely deadpan expression. Issei met her gaze with a sheepish grin. You aren't gonna be on the roof for much longer, at this rate. Kuroka said matter-of-factly. A chill ran down Issei's spine. He figured he'd better do something quick, otherwise risk the wrath of his definitely not at Sundeer Queen. You know. Issei struggled to find what to say. He knew what he wanted to say, but for some reason, he was always at a loss for words around Kuroka. Oh, boy. You're gonna say something sappy, aren't you? That's your sappy stutter. Kuroka said, smirking. He typically did the same cute stutter whenever he was trying to say something lovey-dovey. Yeah. I was gonna say. I'm really glad you crashed through my window. Issei said, looking out over his land. His right hand was entwined with her left, resting on top of her left thigh. That makes two of us, Naya. Issei, wanting to show her just how glad he was, reached into her psyche with Senjutsu. She gladly opened herself up to him in response, and the two of them shared every emotion. Issei was beyond elated to see her negative feelings had been nearly eradicated. So, when I go to the raiding game, I'm going to eat Riser Phoenix's head off or whatever, get Kaneko to love you again, and then we'll be a big happy family. Well, a tiny happy family. For now. Issei said, laying out the plan. A happy family. Not something I'd ever thought I'd hear. That sounds better than you can even imagine, Dragon Boy. Kuroka said, her usual humorous tone replaced with one of pure tranquil bliss as they both looked out over the sunset. I dunno, I think I can imagine it pretty well. You, me, big cathedral, huge wedding. Whole 9 yards. A devil dragon and a devil Nekoshou getting married in a cathedral. That sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, Naya. Kuroka said, snickering. But, even then. It does sound nice. I can't think of anything nicer. You know, most devils don't actually get married, especially high-class devils. They generally just have harems. Nope. I'd rather die than be with anyone but you. Try again. Issei said, shooting the concept down before she could even fully say it. Kuroka's cheeks got just a little red, and she smiled happily. Just double-checking. You know. It's getting late. I'm sure the staff will have us a 3-course meal ready in there, and then? And then? Kuroka asked, very interested. She knew what he was implying, but it was always good to remind him who the better tease was. And then, I'm going straight to bed. Super tired. Issei said instead, deflecting her attempt altogether. Howard. Alright, you got me. Here's what I was actually thinking about doing. Issei leaned in close to Kuroka and whispered something into her ear. Her tail started swishing rapidly, and her expression got excited. Yeah, I think I like that idea more. The two of them retreated to their new bed and skipped dinner entirely. I don't want to wait for her to show up here. You're not picking a fight with Tiamat. It's not picking a fight, I just want to make sure we're not on any kind of bad terms. If she came here and ate everybody while I was gone or something, it would be a bit of an issue. Then take me with you. No way, not happening. Not if she could be a threat. If she could be a threat, then don't go. Kuroka was about to explode. Issei insisted on being stubborn, despite her frustration. He wanted to go into the familiar forest and find the Dragon King Tiamat. He'd been on edge about her ever since Tannen's warning a few days ago, and he'd finally had enough of waiting for her to show up. I have to. Issei said quietly. In his eyes, there was no choice to be made. He couldn't sit around and wait for a Dragon King to show up unannounced and make a meal out of everyone, and he damn sure wasn't going to take Kuroka with him into the dragon's den. No, you don't. Issei, please. Kuroka lost her fire in an instant, closing the gap between herself and her king. Issei was standing beside their large bedroom window, modified by Yulia herself into something of a hatch he could jump fly out of. Kuroka, a whole 25 centimeters shorter than him, looked almost straight up at Issei with nothing but pleading in her eyes. The thought of him going out and getting killed by some Dragon King, especially today, was abhorrent. Don't go. Not today. Kuroka spoke too softly for anyone without enhancing hearing to pick up, but Issei heard her loud and clear. Her eyes were near impossible to resist, and he might have called it off and stayed home if it weren't for the sound they both heard. A massive roar, originating from somewhere towards the familiar forest. It called out in challenge, daring anyone nearby to answer. Issei perked up, turning towards the sound with instinctual predation in his eyes. She knew what that meant, but it didn't stop her from trying. Issei, no. At least not today, it's my. Issei had already leaped out the window, leaving Kuroka standing by herself. Ears flat, tails drooping, and eyes bleak, she looked as broken-hearted as you can imagine. Birthday? Kuroka sighed and flopped ungracefully down onto their bed, face first. Would he ever listen? Maybe he just didn't get it. Issei was all she had. Kaneko hated her mother was as absent as she'd ever been, and she wasn't close to anyone else. Issei Haidu was her everything, figuratively and literally. She'd follow him anywhere, do anything for him. She'd gladly die with him if the situation ever called for it. She just wanted to be with him, whatever form that took. It's why she was in the underworld in the first place. She hadn't come for the land or the mansion or the stupid title, she was there for Issei. But even then, he insisted on disregarding her feelings, time and time again. She wasn't sure if he was even aware of what he was doing, but it didn't really matter. He was still doing it. Several times now, Kuroka's opinion or feelings had been completely disregarded by Issei. When she was first teaching him senjutsu, and he tore open her mind. She had been fine with the aftermath, but that was essentially mental assault. He hadn't had a right to, she'd warned him not to, and he did it anyway. When she was trying to help him with the boosted gear, and he very nearly killed himself. The thoughts going through her mind when she watched her beloved erupt into flames had been nothing short of desperation. The thought of him killing himself right there, in front of her, doing something she told him not to do and warned him about, just to gain power. It made her sick to remember. Once again, the aftermath had been fine, but the whole disregard for her was apparent. Again, when he forced her to talk to Kaneko. She hadn't been ready. He knew that. He made her do it anyway, and exactly what she expected had happened. She knew he was just trying to help, it was probably the right thing to do anyway, and the result would have been the same regardless. But it still hurt. And then, just a few days ago. When he thought they were under attack by Tannen, he'd thrown her aside and charged into battle with a Dragon King by himself, despite the fact that she could fight just as well as or even better than he could. She'd felt beyond annoyed that he'd do something so reckless without her there, and here he was, doing the exact same thing. Kuroka felt like screaming into a pillow. She loved him so much it hurt, and he really was all she had. Then, she had thought. Not just any thoughts. One of the kind that you don't want, that you don't expect. The thought that worms its way into your psyche without any invitation, without any warning or beckoning. She had an intrusive thought in every sense of the word. Was Kuroka not worth his consideration? At first, she wholeheartedly dismissed the notion. Of course not. He'd shown her time and time again through both his actions and his feelings that she meant the world to him just as he did her. But as a lonely hour passed and he still didn't return, she felt out. On paper, she was beneath him. She was just one of his pieces, a queen to the king. But he'd always assured her he didn't care about that he didn't think of her as anything less than his absolute equal. What if he really didn't think she was worth it? That she wasn't really his equal and that her opinion was just a nuisance? Once again, she dismissed the thought. But then another vile idea crept into her mind, one that she couldn't repress. If he really cared about her or how she felt, he wouldn't be out fighting a dragon while she withered away in their bedroom. He wouldn't have blown off her warnings and nearly committed suicide or done any of the other things he'd done. But maybe she was overreacting. Maybe 4 or 5 times he'd been inconsiderate could be offset by all the things he'd given her. For one, he'd literally saved her life. If it wasn't for Issei, she would have bled to death on the floor of a suburban house. He'd lied and threatened Surzich's as Lucifer, the king of devils himself, just so she could finally have some peace and quiet for once, instead of being hunted like an animal. He'd shown her how to love and be loved. It was a long time since she'd felt either of those things before him. He'd literally turned himself into a dragon, and even though she hated how he'd done it, she couldn't deny it was a fantastic thing after the fact. Now he was certainly powerful enough to protect her, which had been his goal the entire time. The list went on and on. Cleared her name, found her sister, given her a home, and the promise of family and children to come. And of course, given up his life as a human or dragon for one as a devil. He'd done so much for her, and what had she done for him? All her frustration for him washed away in an instant, replaced by guilt and shame. She didn't deserve anything he'd given her, and she certainly deserves anything else from him. Not even on her birthday. That's why he was so eager to ignore her. She was a freeloader in his eyes, and it was likely that he didn't even love her. Kuroka growled out of frustration. She knew that wasn't true. He'd literally shown her that much, allowing her to read his feelings whenever she needed to quell her insecurities. He would never hate her, never stop loving her. But her intrusive thoughts wouldn't let up, and the urge to wallow in self-doubt and depression was almost too much for the poor cat to bear. Kuroka turned this way and that on their bed, hoping to find some solace and rest, but she was unable to reach comfort and became more restless than ever. Another hour passed. "Lady Kuroka, are you alright?" Yuli's stern voice rang out from behind the door, and Kuroka felt the urge to jump out the window herself. She quickly wiped her face off with their blankets, unwilling to show anyone her tears. "I'm fine." Kuroka spoke with some effort, audibly trying to keep her voice from cracking. "It's unhealthy to stay in bed for so long." "Go away, Julie. I don't need any help." "As you wish." Footsteps could be heard retreating away from the room, and Kuroka went right back to wallowing. Another hour. A total of 3 hours since he'd left. She hadn't moved, hadn't left the bed. Her thoughts had only soured, only become more self-deprecating. Then, with no warning at all, a crash. Their window exploded into fingernail-sized motes of glass, hanging suspended in the air like time itself had stopped. Kuroka flipped off of the bed, facing the window with a black-purple magic circle spinning to life behind her. "Issei?" "Kuroka." Issei, just retracting his dragon wings, ran forward and closed the gap between them. The hanging glass fell harmlessly to the ground, held in the air by Issei's beginner-level devil magic that he'd swiftly lost focus on. Issei dashed to Kuroka and wrapped her in a tight embrace, burying her head in his chest. He pressed her head to him like he was afraid she'd fly off. "I'm so sorry." Issei was out of breath, which was odd for him. "I should have listened. I had no idea. Kaneko told me." "Kaneko? Told you what? Are you okay?" Kuroka was enjoying being wrapped in his arms, but she wanted to know what was happening. What today was? Issei yelled, frustrated not at her but at himself. "October 1st. Your birthday." "Oh." Kuroka mumbled, quiet. She'd almost forgotten herself. It certainly hadn't felt like a birthday. "Yeah. Damn it. I left you here all alone. I'm so sorry. I've been so dumb." Kuroka felt something warm touch her face, so she pulled her head away and looked up at him. Issei was crying. "Whoa, hey, it's not that big of." Yes, it is. Issei fell onto his knees, holding Kuroka's hands clasped together in his. He faced the ground like he was unworthy of looking up to her. Julie told me. She called me on one of those magic circle things and told me how you'd been sitting in here crying for over 2 hours and I came back as soon as possible. Kuroka, I'm so sorry. It all clicked for me on the way back over here. The way I've been treating you is unacceptable. I don't need Senjutsu to see how sad you are and I know it's all my fault, so I made you something. The birthday present. Issei stood back up, her hand still in his. Kuroka looked confused but didn't interrupt him. Tannen showed me how to make it and Tiamat helped me perfect it just earlier. I was going to give it to you after the game, but now seems perfect. Kuroka felt something slide on her finger. Surprised, she looked down at her hand. It was a ring, but not like any she'd ever seen. That's one of my scales. Tannen helped me get my fire hot enough to melt it and then we forged it into that shape. Issei explained. Kuroka was fascinated. She'd never been one for jewelry, but this ring was beyond unique. It was a dull red band unadorned by any gem, yet still more beautiful than anything she'd seen. True to his word, it was the exact same darkened red as Issei's scale hide and reflected light in a way that made it seem almost prismatic. It's beautiful, Issei. Kuroka was near speechless. It felt perfect on her ring finger and she couldn't believe he'd given something so precious to her. Dragons don't shed their scales. The ones they're born with are the ones they have forever and they don't regenerate when pried off. It had to have been a big painful decision, but he'd done it anyway. That's not all. Check it out. Issei held up another one, the exact same as hers. He slid it over his own ring finger and suddenly Kuroka felt an influx of emotions. Admiration. Happiness. Childish, giddy infatuation. What is this? Kuroka asked, her voice cracking. All the doubts and self-loathing she'd been having were washed away in an instant. Issei pulled her in close again, tucking her head into his chest and nestling his own on top of her. These rings are unbreakably linked. No matter how far away we get from each other, no matter what's between us, we can always feel each other. It's an infinite range Senjutsu link, using ancient dragon magic. I never ever want you to feel alone again. Kuroka looked deeper into the ring with Senjutsu. It was true. She could reach into Issei through it, just like normal. No wonder she'd felt so loved. He was pouring his heart into her. When I put that ring on you, I felt all the bad things you feel. I promise right now, I'll never ignore you again, and if you ever think I don't love you, just touch the ring. You'll never have to be lonely again, even in your emotions. You don't have to guess. Everything I feel about you is right here on your finger. It was like he'd read her mind. Just moments ago, she'd been thinking of all the ways he hated her and wallowing in her own self-made torments, and now all she had to do was reach into the ring to feel him. It was like nothing she'd ever felt. Every single one of her doubts turned on their heads. Issei didn't think she was a burden or a freeloader, he felt like he owed her for making his life so much better. He didn't think she was an equal. In his eyes, she was unimaginably better than him. Wow. Wow. Kuroka couldn't think of what to say. She hadn't gotten a birthday gift in well over a decade and it was more than anything she ever could have dreamed of. Happy birthday, Kuroka. Issei kissed the top of her head. Sorry I was dumb. Kuroka smirked into his chest. She was more than back to normal. She felt like she could take on the world with him at her side. You were dumb. But I think this makes up for it. This and kittens, Naya. As many as you want. Kaneko says happy birthday, by the way. That got her attention. Really? Yeah. Serafal told her everything. She wants to talk to you. She does. MHMM. That's all I'll say. Kuroka just leaned into him, processing the news. She hadn't expected that even if Serafal told Kaneko what the real story was. She had expected more hatred. Trying out her new ring, Kuroka reached into Issei. He was radiating nothing but assurance and she was suddenly filled with determination. Then I'll talk to her. Great. They just stood there for a moment, enjoying the embrace. Eventually, Issei sat down on the edge of the bed. Kuroka sat close by, leaning on him. He idly rubbed her far shoulder with his right hand, which she couldn't get enough of. So, you found Tiamat. What was her deal? Tannen had it wrong. It's not ill blood she had. It's just blood. What? You don't mean. I do mean. Mother of Dragons is apparently way more literal than you'd think. She was just eager to see her kid, I think. Drake is comatose at the moment, she left him in shock. Guess he forgot who his mom was. Drake was Tiamat's kid. Yup. Let me tell you, explaining that I wasn't her son was probably the hardest thing I've had to do. She kept telling me how I looked exactly like him and all that stuff. So I guess she likes you. Yeah. Said she'll be staying in the familiar forest, but don't hesitate if I need her for anything. Great. But, where in the world did you meet Kaneko? Also the familiar forest, actually. Riaz and her peerage were helping their newest member, some blonde girl, pick out a familiar. I happened to fly right over. Let me tell you, seeing their faces when I landed right by them. Oh, priceless. Kuroka laughed, imagining how they'd react. So, just a little bit longer, and then the rating game. Issei commented, coming to terms with the fact that he'd be revealing himself to the devil world for real. Are you ready? I think so. This riser guy doesn't know what's coming. You got that right, Naya. That's it guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. With that, take care.